So welcome everyone to the FSA's June board meeting, which is being held here in Newcastle upon Tyne. Particular welcome to Emily Ancliffe, who's our Director of Strategy, Trade and Food System Policy. Emily was actually in the audience for the last board meeting, and I have to say, feels like you're very much part of the team, Emily, but this is actually your first board meeting where you're joining us at the table, so welcome. I also want to take the opportunity to congratulate Professor Ian Young, CBE, on the award of this honour in the King's Birthday list last weekend for services to health services research and development and to health education, very much reflecting the huge amount of work that Ian has done, particularly in Northern Ireland, in his position as the Chief Scientific Advisor to the Department of Health. But of course, Ian's done so much more in terms of public service with the Scientific Advisory Committee on Nutrition and many other roles. So we were delighted to have you anyway, Ian, but we're absolutely thrilled that you've been honoured in that way. One other little bit of point I want to make is that I need to give my apologies that I'm going to have to step out of this meeting for a short while at 10:30 today, and then I'll rejoin after the break. There's a ministerial meeting relating to the SPS agreement, and I think it's important that I should represent the FSA at that. Tim Riley will chair, I'm sure very ably, in my absence. It does mean I'll unfortunately miss the discussion of the CSA report, but the good thing about us live streaming these meetings is that I can catch up on the recording later, but my apologies for that. As usual, we've received a number of questions from members of the public in advance of this meeting. 3 of those relate to the risky food paper. There are 59 questions from the Cannabis Trade Association, which are linked to previous minutes and some of the matters arising, which I think Katie will mention in her report. We've also had 9 questions, I think, in relation to animal welfare, with a mix of both questions and suggestions about our work in abattoirs, which we'll pick up under that item. As usual, all of the questions have been published. They've been made available to board members who've had an opportunity to consider them in advance of today's meeting. And I'm quite sure that board members will want to pick up on some of those as we go through the proceedings today. As usual, we'll respond to all of the questions in writing after the board. So, as ever, can I really start the main proceedings of the meeting by asking if any board members have got any new external interests that they wish to declare, or indeed if they've got any interests in relation to items on the agenda today. Tim.
Thank you, Chair. I should just highlight an existing interest that's already on the declaration of interest, but is pertinent to Katie's report in relation to the JR. So that is my business membership of the NFU.
I should probably also add that we have a family farm, which I think we are also members of the NFU. So moving on now, if that's everything, let's look at the minutes from the last meeting, which was the board meeting that we held in Weymouth. Are board members content to accept these minutes as an accurate record of that meeting? Lots of nods around the table. So let's move on quickly then to the actions from the last meeting. I think most of those are complete, and the work on the future of food regulation will come to a future board as we planned. I noticed that we are also still carrying a couple of actions from previous meetings relating to CBD and to meat charging. The board is being kept in touch with what's happening on both of those issues, and they'll come back to a public meeting for decisions later. There's also one action which relates to the annual report on food standards. I think we can close that off now because we had a very useful discussion on this yesterday with the board at Food Standards Scotland. It is, of course, you'll remember, a joint report. We set the report, which we call Our Food, up to monitor food standards in the UK out with the EU. And I think given the prospect of the SPS deal, we need to think carefully about the content, what content is going to be most useful going forward. In addition, the UK Food Security Report, which is produced by DEFRA, but which both we and Food Standards Scotland contribute to, has, I think, really got into its stride now and contains a lot of the information that we had been publishing in our food. So I think it's right that we just pause and reconsider the content of that report, and Food Standards Scotland were in agreement with that as well. So that means there won't be we won't publish our food next year, but we will take away and consider how best we can maintain our sort of watchdog role in reporting on the state of food standards across the UK going forward. Are there any other comments on the actions from previous meetings, or any of the other matters arising that board members wanted to pick up on, which aren't going to come up later in the agenda? Okay, so if not, we will press on, and this is my opportunity really to give you just an oral update on what's been happening over the last few months. I should say it's great to be up here in Newcastle. I've been chair now for 5 years. This is our second visit to Newcastle, and on this occasion we unfortunately weren't able to do our usual round of stakeholder visits, but instead we had a really useful meeting with Food Standards Scotland yesterday, and I'm really grateful to them for travelling to join us here in Newcastle. I know they have their own board meeting in Scotland today, so it was really good of them to come down. I think it was quite a productive series of workshop sessions, which will really enable us to continue the very productive and collaborative relationship we have with them, which is going to become even more important when we, assuming that we have an SPS deal. Thinking of matters in Parliament, there have been a few ministerial changes since we last met. So first, on behalf of the board, I want to say congratulations and best wishes to the new Welsh Government, particularly to the new First Minister of Wales, as well as Nerys Evans on her appointment as the Deputy Minister for Public and Preventative Health and the FSA's new Minister in Wales. Secondly, I'd like to welcome new ministers in Westminster to their new portfolios following the May reshuffle, including James Murray as Secretary of State for Health and Social Care, Preet Gill as Minister for Safety and Health Innovation. And then just last weekend, we heard that Minister Eagle, who was the Minister at DEFRA, has moved to the Home Office and has been replaced by Stephen Morgan as the new Minister for Food Security and Rural Affairs. I met Stephen during his time as a minister at the Department for Education to discuss school food, and I really look forward to working with him on a broader food agenda now he's at DEFRA. I do, however, want to say thank you to Angela Eagle for her very active engagement with the FSA while she was a minister at DEFRA. I very much enjoyed working with her. That leads me neatly onto recent engagements, and at the start of this month we held the FSA's annual parliamentary reception, which was really well attended this year by various MPs and peers alongside some of our stakeholders. It was held just ahead of World Food Safety Day, which was a very fitting opportunity, I think, to reflect on the FSA's work to make sure that every day is Food Safety Day, and really underline the importance of food safety to protecting public health. I'm really grateful that several board members were able to join me that day, and my thanks to everyone at FSA who worked so hard to make it happen and who joined in the conversations on the day. I also want to thank Leila Moran, who is the chair of the Health and Social Care Select Committee, who sponsored the event, and also the FSA sponsor minister, Sharon Hodgson, for both attending and speaking at that meeting. We will be holding similar events in Wales and Northern Ireland later in the year. Talking of Northern Ireland, I was really pleased to be in Belfast last month to attend the annual Balmoral show. I had a super busy and very productive couple of days, meeting lots of stakeholders, and it was really good to see how well embedded the FSA team in Northern Ireland are with partners right across the food system. I was able to meet with both the Minister of Agriculture, Environment and Rural Affairs, Andrew Muir, and the Minister of Health, Mike Nesbitt, and also managed to bump into DEFRA ministers who were also attending the show. It was quite the place to be, I would say. Several members of the EFRA committee were there too, and I was also able to join them on a visit to the Belfast SPS product inspection facility, which was a really impressive operation, and we were able to see the very close working that's been developed there between UK officials and the EU. Helps me segue into broader questions of borders. And since our March board meeting, the FSA has been working really closely with DEFRA and with the Cabinet Office on the SPS negotiations, working to really ensure that any agreement protects food safety and consumer interests, and discussing the arrangements for the UK to be able to continue to contribute to future decisions. That's really important under a situation of dynamic alignment, that we should be able to contribute a UK perspective to future decisions. The FSA is going to have a really important role to play in implementation, with secondary legislation expected right across our policy areas. We have been holding a number of sector-specific roundtables and issuing other communications together with DEFRA to keep businesses informed. And we've also been having a whole series of roadshows with local authorities, and we will continue to do that right through in the lead up to the deal and during the implementation. I completely, I've attended a few of these events, and I completely recognise that everybody is looking for greater clarity. But I hope that stakeholders will appreciate that there is only so much that we can say, or indeed that we can put in place, until the final outcome of the negotiations is known. We have heard just yesterday that the next UK-EU summit will be held on July the 22nd, and I hope at that point we will have much more information which we can communicate and will help us to advance our planning. We really do want to try to provide as much practical support as we can to businesses and other stakeholders, particularly in local authorities, as we move towards and indeed beyond the entry into force date, which we're still planning will be sometime next summer. Now, when we're thinking about an SPS agreement, of course, our international engagement is as important as the work we're doing in the UK. And I've held a series of SPS-themed engagements in Berlin with the German government, with industry, academia, and some of the novel food companies. I think overall that visit was a real opportunity for some very constructive conversations about the implications and the opportunities that are presented by the SPS agreement, including for much closer collaboration between the UK and Germany. You might recall that we've previously set up an MOU with BFR, who's our main partner in Berlin, and that's already helps us to have a very active scientific interchange. But I hope that will only be enhanced under an SPS agreement. I continue to be really heartened actually by the positivity of our German colleagues at the prospect of closer working on science, as well as some of the operational aspects of the SPS agreement. So SPS is taking up a lot of our time and of thought, certainly for officials, but for me as well. It's probably, well, it's certainly been the biggest thing on my agenda over the last few months, but other work is still progressing. And one of the things I'm excited about is that we're continuing to support DHSC in developing the proposals for mandatory healthier food sales reporting and targets. You remember that was announced as part of the NHS 10-year plan, and we are working with DHSC officials to provide advice, really to ensure that whatever scheme is, whatever policy is brought in is going to be deliverable, proportionate and enforceable. DHSC does intend to launch a full public consultation soon to gather views on the proposals, and I think any potential role for the FSA will become clearer after that consultation. In a similar vein, I met recently with Olivia Bailey, who's the Minister for Education, to discuss the proposed new school food standards, which DfE has been consulting on very recently. You might recall there was a piece of joint work between the Department for Education, OHID, the Office of Health Improvement and Disparities, and the FSA back in 2023, I think, which was a pilot to see how we might be able to support the monitoring of compliance with the school food standards. I agreed with the Minister that the FSA will continue to work with DfE to develop these plans for compliance and enforcement going forward, recognising that there may be a role for the FSA, but that needs to be part of a wider system of monitoring. I do think thinking about both healthier food reporting and targets and the school food standards, these are really important steps towards creating a healthier food system for the UK, and I'm very, very keen that the FSA should support that. However, I also recognise that both of these would represent quite significant new functions for the FSA, and we do need to be very confident that we have the resources to deliver these new roles effectively. Resources not just not financially, but also that we have the capacity and the capability within the organisation to be able to take these on. And Katie and I are talking about what that would require. In other sort of domestic matters, plans for the Future Food Regulation Programme are developing. Soon after the March board meeting, I hosted a stakeholder roundtable, and board members have been attending some of the workshops that the team have been running around the country on this. It's a really good opportunity for the board to hear directly from stakeholders about their views as we start to develop proposals for this programme. The board subgroup that we set up to scrutinise this area more closely met recently and was updated on the progress. And I'm pleased to see that ideas are beginning to emerge. The input we're getting from stakeholders is invaluable, and I really urge people to attend the workshops and really contribute their views at this very formative stage of the programme. I also hope that over the summer, those proposals are going to start to crystallise and that they will come back to the board in the autumn. I feel like I've been talking for quite a long time. It's been quite a busy period. The full list of all my engagements has been published as usual, and board members have seen that. I'm not going to go through it in detail, just to say I had really interesting visits to the port at Felixstowe and also to the Quadram Institute in Norwich. I'm trying to get better at reflecting on these visits sort of in the moment on my LinkedIn page, so you can find more detail there if you're interested in those particular ventures. But on that note, I'm going to stop, but very happy to take any questions or comments from the board on any of this, or really anything else you think I might have been up to over the last few months. Crushing silence. Oh, Alison is going.
It would be very interesting to hear your thoughts and reflections on your visit to the Quadram Institute.
Well, so the first thing is that the Norwich Science Park, where they're based, is extraordinary. I mean, Ian was with me, actually, and Rick Mumford, who's our deputy CSA. There's an amazing alignment between the NHS, the NIHR, the National Institute of Health Research, and UKRI, the Research Council's BBSRC, and indeed quite a bit of industry engagement as well. And I think that partnership is really powerful for translational research. There are, it's a beautiful new shiny building, which is always a joy, but it's not really the point. What matters is what goes on inside it. And we identified a number of areas which are really pertinent to our work, particularly things looking at the effect of food and food components on the microbiome. which Ian will be following up on. And also they're doing some important work. The John Innes, which is sort of co-located, has been doing quite a bit on precision breeding. But what we were able to see is that some of the products from that, actually, it wasn't the precision breeding, it was just their selective breeding program actually that we saw. Those are being taken into human trials in their metabolic facility to really look at how, whether the sort of functional properties, really play out when you feed them these foods to people. So I thought it was an impressive setup. Inevitably, when the chair goes to visit, you do a very high-level view of what they're doing. But I think the important thing is that it's opened up conversations for Ian, for Rick, and for some other specific teams within the FSA to follow up on. Yeah, it was really worthwhile. The board, in fact, will be holding our meeting in Norwich in December. And I think we might look to organise some visits, certainly to the Norwich Research Park. And that's really with Ian and his team to set up. Okay, what we'll do now then is move on to the Chief Exec's report, which really will give you a bit more of the sort of operational detail and indeed the hard work that goes on underneath some of the topics I've just mentioned. So Katie, over to you.
Thank you, Susan. Good morning, everyone. I, as always, am happy to answer questions on anything that's in the report or any more operational detail you would like to ask me about. I think we'll be inevitably having a bit of duplication between the areas we're covering because there is so much going on at the moment, but there are a few I particularly wanted to draw out. So Susan's talked about the SPS agreement. First of all, I am very pleased to be able to tell the board that we have now had the resources we need from the Treasury to do the work on the SPS agreement this year. And that's really significant for us because it enables us to do a much better job for people and businesses in supporting the agreement work and the implementation. We're still in discussion about subsequent years' funding, so I'm sure we'll be talking about that at the board more. As Susan said, the news hot off the press is that the summit has been announced for the 22nd of July. That's where I think we expect the details of whatever agreement is eventually agreed to become public. Susan's talked about the industry engagement that has been going on extensively. I think that the really strong messages we've heard from that engagement are first of all, to share as much information as we can, as early as we can. And obviously, at this stage in the process, that there are real constraints on that. But the second is a really strong ask from some parts of the food sector to support transition by enabling products that are authorised in the EU to be used in the UK as soon as we can. So on the second, we're taking that thought away. We're thinking hard about whether there is anything we can do to support early alignment in that way or others. On the first ask, the sort of as much information as possible, I think it's worth saying we are now in the final weeks of a live international agreement negotiation. So there will be limits on that, but we need to look to that summit date and plan to be ready to share as much as we can after that date. As Susan mentioned, we've received 59 questions from the Cannabis Trades Association, and many of those relate to the SPS agreement and the effect that it might have in relation to CBD. But there are also a lot of questions about the next steps that we will follow in our consultation on market authorisations more generally. We can't answer 59 questions here, so I think we will need to write, but the fact that we've had them is a reminder of how significant the impact of this agreement may be for our market authorisation applicants. And as the board will remember, we've written to every applicant and authorisation holder to set out what an agreement based on dynamic alignment would mean for them. We'll obviously keep communicating as soon as we can when there is more certainty on what it means for the businesses we regulate in that respect. And if we think about the next month or so on the agreement, I don't expect there will be any decisions for the board to make. It'll be government ministers who will be taking ultimately the decisions on what they will accept in an agreement. But we do have the July kit call very shortly after that summit date, so we will be able to talk further then about the implications for the FSA and for the sectors we regulate of whatever's agreed. And our focus will be on working with DEFRA to support implementation, to get information out to businesses, local authorities, port health authorities, and so on as quickly as we can. I also mentioned growth goals in my report. There is a cross-government process with the UK government underway at the moment, where regulators are being asked to agree growth goals with their sponsor departments. And we have agreed a set with the Department of Health and Social Care. Susan has agreed them on behalf of the board. I haven't included the goals in here because it's expected that they will be part of a coordinated cross-government announcement in the next few weeks or so. But the board will be really familiar with the areas of our work which contribute to economic growth. We've talked about them a lot. The SPS agreement is obviously one, the work of our innovation hub, the Future Food Regulation Programme, for example. So we'll be covering those sort of areas in the growth goals, and also what we are doing through increased use of AI tools and automation to try and deliver regulation in a more efficient way. And we might get on to examples of that, I think, in the incidents discussion. Susan mentioned the healthy food reporting and targets. We have had confirmation from the Department of Health in a letter yesterday that some funding will be provided for us to do work to support DHSC policy development that Susan mentioned. I know that was a concern that the board had when we talked about it last. So we're now in a better position to do that work on the commitments to develop healthy food targets and reporting in the 10-year plan. But obviously decisions not yet taken about whether there's a future regulatory role for us. And the final thing, I don't usually pause on my engagements in this report, but I think it is worth drawing out a bit about the International Heads of Food Agencies Forum, which I attended in New Zealand in April. So it's a forum I go to every year, which has got about 20 heads of food agencies from around the world. It's very, very useful for doing business. For example, in the bilaterals in the margins, we signed our memorandum of understanding, which will strengthen our cooperation with the Indian food regulator, which is extremely useful. It's also really useful for learning from other countries. And while I was there, I was able to do some visits, which included learning about the pilots underway in New Zealand on the use of AI technology to support food safety in abattoirs. But the theme of the plenary for that meeting was risk communication. And we had a really, really fruitful discussion about the challenges of credibly communicating risk and uncertainty and building and maintaining trust in an increasingly volatile world. And it was striking how everyone around the table was grappling with these issues. And my speech is online. You can read it there. I felt extremely well supported and prepared by the work that Claire and her team have done on this recently, and was able to share our research on what drives trust in communications. We had a lot of discussion in the margins about the impact of the Middle East conflict on the food system and on the availability of not just food, but also a lot of other things which those in the food system rely on. That conversation continues within government internationally. We're hosting the International Heads of Food Agencies Forum next year in London, so we've got a real opportunity, actually. And we have proposed a theme, which is not yet agreed, but seemed to be quite welcomed by delegates, of dealing with food system disruption and how we maintain safety in that sort of much more volatile environment that we all seem to be working in now. So that's one to look forward to next April, and I think it will be really fruitful for us. And that's a slight segue into the final point I wanted to raise. as the board will know, we've been doing some internal restructuring as part of our wider FSA Ready Change programme, which is all about getting us ready for the challenges of the future. And one of the big drivers for that is a need for us to strengthen our ability to anticipate and to respond to food system risk. And you'll see that come through in the incidents paper we're going to talk about later. As part of that, those changes, we are creating a new system resilience directorate, which will bring together many of the functions across the FSA that do that and create some new ones, including our risk intelligence hub that we are developing. And I'm really pleased to be able to say to the board that we have got a new director coming to lead that directorate. Claire Dinnis will join us on the 1st of September from the Wildfowl and Wetlands Trust, where she currently is, but she spent most of her career at the Environment Agency and is well used to responding to incidents and managing system risk as a regulator. So I know she's really looking forward to joining, and I'm pleased she will be with us by the time of the next board. So happy to take any questions.
That's great, Katie. Thank you. I mean, really, I can't say fantastic news about the SPS funding. That's a huge relief. I think you had reallocated resource very effectively to make sure we had enough, but on the other hand, that was compromising other areas. So great to have that, and I'm really pleased the Treasurer has recognised the importance of that. I should say that I'm meeting with the SPS team every week. I feel like I'm really being kept up to date with what's happening in that, which is very, very fast moving. Huge thanks to that team for all the work that they're doing. Great. Lovely to be reminded of your visit to New Zealand. Board members have had a fuller readout of that, and I think it is great news that we're going to be hosting the event next year. I'm sure the board will be keen to hear details about the plans for that as they shape up. Over to board members for any questions or more detail on anything that Katie has talked about there. Louise.
I've just got 2 points really. One, to reiterate Susan's comment about sort of a big thank you for the SPS funding. I know the team worked really hard on it, so it's very good, particularly actually because it now means actually we're not stretching some of the other departments quite so much. My question really was then, was there anything from New Zealand that really stood out that another country was doing on food regulation that you think actually that could be a good learning for us?
So there are several different regulatory models which are going to be, I think, useful for us to think about in our future food regulation programme. I'm not saying that that these are ones we should specifically adopt, but there is a lot of learning we can get from other regulators. Our counterpart in Norway has just gone through a process of creating a much more national level regulation system for different types of businesses. And that's definitely something we will look at as we look at the ideas of national level regulation. We learned quite a lot about the regulatory assurance system in New Zealand and the way in which it's set up and the use of the ways in which they have integrated third-party assurance with regulation and oversight. So that I'm not saying these will be directions we go in, but it really did strike me that there's a wealth of information out there and a wealth of learning, and we've got the contacts to use that.
Thank you, Chair. I just wanted to follow up on the food system's impact in the conflict in the Middle East. We know that situation is obviously very fluid. It changes almost every hour at the moment. But it's mentioned in the annual animal welfare report as well, and that was about availability of CO2 in abattoirs. I know that that's absolutely critical, of course, for appropriate stunning of pigs and poultry, and it will create huge problems with our food chain if we have problems. So how are we happy we have a regular and dependable supply of CO2 going forward? I look to Junior if he wants to come in on this, but
we've done some contingency work on CO2. I don't think we are anticipating a problem, but Junior, if there's any more you want to add, please do.
Thanks, Katie. Yes, you're right. So we have done the contingency work. We've been monitoring stock levels for some time now and have been feeding that into DEFRA and other departments. You'll be aware that we've recently, not we, but government have recently commissioned the opening up of another plant to provide CO2. We've done scenario planning. So I think we're in a good space at this point in time.
Thank you.
Yeah, thank you, Katie. I noticed in your report on item 6 about the evaluation of the work around infant formula, and I mean, congratulations to the team. You know, I think that was a huge amount of work to manage that incident. But I did also notice that there was a report by the First Steps Nutrition Trust, which looked at a number of issues and made quite significant recommendations for the FSA, among other organisations, around partly around communications, but also perhaps more fundamentally around testing of formula by where it's manufactured, and also looking at the microbiological risks that entail from formula. Obviously, that organisation is coming at it from a point of view of promoting breastfeeding as opposed to formula. But I just wondered how are we going to respond to some of those quite constructive, I felt, comments and recommendations?
We've got the report from the First Steps Nutrition Trust. They sent it to us, so we will be responding to them about it. As you said, there are quite a few recommendations, some really useful thinking in there, both in terms of communications and incident response and testing and so on. And their recommendations not just to us, but also the Department for Health, who own the responsibility for infant formula supply and in England, and also others like OPSS. So there's quite a bit of work, I think, to do across agencies to look at the recommendations, but we will be responding to them in due course. We're not there yet.
Alison, did you want to follow up on that particular point?
Yes, I would. I was really pleased to see that there had been a strong evaluation of the communications on that incident. It would be useful to have a little more detail about what was successful, what were the learnings, how did it vary from previous incidences, and what did you celebrate and what would you like to do better next time?
I can see Katie's handing that one to you, Claire. So.
Thank you. Yes, as the report says, we were very pleased with the levels of awareness that we generated during that incident, with 90% of parents or carers with children under the age of 2 being aware, and 96% of those people actually taking action. One of the things that I think was invaluable for us during this incident was the sort of partnership working and our ability to tap into parenting networks, which obviously were crucial in kind of getting the word out. But we also saw in this incident, which differs from previous incidents, that social media was the primary means by which the word was kind of passed around and people got their information. So I think that's particularly useful insight for us in thinking about when we're having to deal with the next one. If I may also just come back to Frank's comment on the First Steps Nutrition report. Some of the recommendations in there on communications I think are really helpful, because they're a useful reminder to us about the need to stay very practical in our messaging, telling parents how to take action as well as what to do. So we'll certainly be looking at those.
Very good. Steve, I think you're next.
Thanks, Chair. I just wanted to pick up on Section 2, Regulation for Growth. And I'm pleased to see that it includes both the SPS agreement, and great to see the funding there, and the future of food regulation work. And just picking up on the point we've said several times before, that effective proportionate regulation is a key foundation for both consumer and business confidence, and hence trust, the issue that Katie was referring to earlier. And that leads on to the foundation for growth. Growth and protection very much go hand in hand. I just wondered whether you thought that that's sufficiently recognised by government in the work that's underway in developing growth goals and targets.
I hope it is, because we've said it to the government many times, and I think in the regulation action plans that the government has produced over the last year or so, we've seen it recognised that proportionate regulation is an important underpinner of economic growth. So I feel like that message is heard. It's very easy for the narrative to get a little bit skewed into regulation is bad for growth. I don't believe that's where the government is. We've had the report of the House of Lords Industry and Regulators Committee, which I appeared before, out as well since the last board, I think, and that recognises the complexities of some of these things. I think it's also worth saying on those growth goals that it was very easy to agree growth goals because we are quite clear how we are supporting economic growth. So it's not like we came up with a load of new stuff that we've agreed. Everything we've agreed is already planned in our business plan and resourced because we've been thinking about how to support economic growth with the board through that process. I think it's very important that we make sure that this continues to be core work rather than the idea that you can do some add-on things. Our primary purpose is protecting public health, protecting consumers. That's never going to change, but we can do that well in a way which supports economic growth.
And I'm glad you mentioned the House of Lords Select Committee. We've talked about it previously, but I think it is well worth going back to that because I think Katie really set out very, very clearly the sort of direction that the board has given, which is that we will never compromise on safety. If we get that wrong, that is disastrous for growth, and that is our first duty. In addition, there are some things we can do which support growth, and I think that point, well, you know, I think Katie landed it very well. You know, the extent to which it's been heard, one never quite knows, but I feel reasonably confident we're in a good place. Any more questions? Fiona.
Thank you, Susan. It's just a comment, really. I also wanted to add my congratulations to the team on securing the extra funding for SPS. But I just wanted to flag that I think we need to be very aware, which I'm sure our team are, of the future needs that we're going to have. It's not just going to be transitional support, legislative support, but also a long-term role in actually making sure that our resources and our skills and particularly our scientific evidence that are available to and shared across the EU networks. And this was certainly something that came up in conversation yesterday with the Scottish Food Standards team. You know, they were very keen that that was going to be a role that we played and we were very active on. So I just wanted to flag that.
I think that's absolutely right. And after an SPS agreement is in force, we will have a decision-shaping role, which will mean we have to do some things differently. We need slightly different capabilities and ways of working within the FSA. We've got work underway internally on that. Obviously, until we know the shape of an agreement, the final shape of an agreement, we won't be able to know exactly what that role looks like, but we can make a reasonable guess to start work. So internally, we have both a set of thinking on what our future role and functions are going to be, which will change with SPS, and our FSA Ready change programme, thinking about where we proactively want to change our functions anyway, and we're bringing those two together. So we are gearing up for quite a lot of change within the FSA over the next few years. And that will be, I think, one of the things that we as an executive team really have to manage very closely, because there is a lot going on, as we often say at the board, and at the same time there is a lot of change going on internally. But that's very much on our radar, and there's a lot of focus on it.
I think one of the conversations Katie and I had after the international heads of agencies was some of the discussions Katie had been had with people like Norway, who've been doing this for some time, and really understanding the scale of investment they put into work in Brussels. So I think that's been really helpful in thinking about our future plans. Is there anything else anybody wanted to ask? Obviously, lots more papers to come, so there'll be opportunities to pick up on some of those elements. Okay, I think I'll draw this paper to a close then. Thank you again, Katie. We've thanked the teams for lots of work, but huge thanks to you for holding it all together and really giving the leadership that you do within the agency. We really really appreciate it. It makes the job of the board a whole lot easier to have a well-run organisation. Thank you. So it's that time of the year when we look at our strategy, and the next paper is the annual update on the progress indicators. So this is really the opportunity for us to take a high-level look at how we are doing against our strategy, and perhaps most importantly, to identify those areas where we maybe need to go further if we're going to deliver on the ambitions we set ourselves, or indeed those areas where perhaps we are, a little bit off target and might need to course correct. As I said at the start, we've agreed that we're not publishing the annual Our Food report, which in the last few years has given us a bit of an opportunity, not just to review where we are on our strategy, but where the whole food system is. Some of the detail that we might have put in Our Food is in this paper. It doesn't have as much depth or as much detail, or indeed as the full breadth, but I think it does give a view on our progress. So this is quite an important discussion. So I'm going to hand over to Emily to really present the high-level view on this paper. Thanks.
Thanks, Susan. So just in summary, the purpose of this paper is to review and update the board on FSA's progress towards our ambitions to ensure that food is safe, is what it says it is, and it's healthier and more sustainable. This is the third time we've reviewed the progress indicators since we published the strategy in March 2022. We've used data from a range of sources for both across the FSA and externally, and I wanted to thank the teams across the FSA who've contributed to this report. Just in summary, for Ambition 1, Food You Can Trust, we are seeing that public trust remains high and broadly stable, although there are some emerging risks, although we are seeing some signs of decline in confidence among small and micro businesses. On Ambition 2, Maintaining Food Standards, overall, the system continues to perform strongly. There are some emerging risks around foodborne disease and incidents, and we're monitoring these closely. And on Ambition 3, Healthier and More Sustainable, we are making a contribution to healthier and more sustainable diets, but it does remain really difficult to quantify our impact or attribute changes specifically to FSA activity. So I'll just briefly outline the findings for each of these three ambitions. So starting with Ambition 1, and this is Maintaining Food You Can Trust. We use data from the Food and U2 survey and business and stakeholder trackers to assess progress against this ambition. The report shows that public confidence in food and the FSA remains high and has actually shown a slight recovery following declines in previous years, with 94% confidence that food is safe and 83% of respondents saying they can rely on us to protect them from food-related risks. However, the position is slightly more mixed when we look at business confidence among our small and our micro businesses. We are aware of a wider context of declining trust in government and in regulators more broadly, and that among small and micro businesses, trustworthy scores for the FSA do remain high, even though there have been some notable declines. These measures give confidence that we can be trusted to give information appropriately, identify where poor standards exist, and we understand the needs of small businesses, and we effectively communicate regulations to food industry. So in kind of that wider context, this decline may not be specific to FSA. It may not be driven by factors that are specific to us. But if we look at that, it does mean that although we are maintaining trust overall, there may be some things that we want to look at, and we will absolutely want to continue to monitor this really closely. On Ambition 2, Maintaining food standards so that food is safe and food is what it says it is. These indicators focus on rates of foodborne disease, business compliance, incidents, allergens, and food crime. Overall, the data shows that our system continues to perform strongly. We have high and stable levels of compliance across the regulated system. Some examples, around 97% of food businesses now achieve a hygiene rating of 3 or above, and we can see high levels of compliance in meat and dairy establishments. On foodborne disease, the data does show that 2 of the 4 key pathogens are above agreed thresholds. Now, as a board, we were notified in March, and we're undertaking further investigations to understand the drivers of this increase and to determine whether any action is needed. There has been an increase in the number of reported incidents over the past year, although it's not yet clear what the cause of this increase is or whether this represents a sustained trend. Within the incidence data, the significant increase in allergen incidents in the last year is also notable. The incidence data in this paper are drawn from the annual incidence report, which of course there'll be an opportunity to discuss later on in the agenda. Just to note, since we shared this paper, there's been some quality assurance on the incidents, and that's actually raised the number slightly, so it's gone from 2,067 to 2,073, and you'll see that corrected, updated figure in the annual incidence report. When we look at this indicator suggests that we are continuing to maintain food standards effectively, and we do have a strong performance overall. But there are some emerging risks around foodborne disease and incidents, and again, with suggesting that we continue to monitor this closely as we move forward. Finally, moving to ambition 3, where we have growing our contribution to an influence on food that is healthier and more sustainable. The indicators for this ambition draw on food and U2 data and case studies to assess our contribution. The latest findings from food and U2 show that a significant proportion of people report making at least one change to their diet for health or sustainability reasons. These findings suggest that these remain important drivers of consumer behaviour, but these are self-reported behaviours, and wider evidence is a little bit more mixed. And it's difficult to draw firm conclusions about overall changes in diet, and it's really difficult to attribute any of these changes to FSA-specific activity. Our contribution is best demonstrated through targeted programmes and partnerships, so our work supporting healthier food targets, which was discussed earlier, our Making Food Better programme in Northern Ireland, details of which are included in the Director of FSA Northern Ireland report later in the agenda. The case studies show we are delivering against this ambition, though the active role we're playing in promoting healthier and more sustainable diets said it's a really important role, but it's hard to work out how much of what we're doing is actually making an impact directly. So just in conclusion, if we look at all of these indicators together, there is a positive picture. This is a system that's well regulated and we have really high levels of public trust. But we should note there are some emerging signals, and it's really important that we don't ignore these. That slight decline in confidence in the FSA among small and micro businesses, and the small increase that we're seeing in incidents. We don't think these are areas of immediate concern, but they might point to a change in the risk profile that relates to reputation and operational risk, and we will make sure that we continue to monitor these closely. Just for the board to consider, we do think that these trends are notable, but we don't think they should necessarily cause a big change in direction, but be interested in thoughts on whether they should shape any of our immediate priorities. And are there kind of areas for further investigation that we should be considering as we move into the final year of our strategy? We'd really welcome the board's views on where additional focus may be needed, particularly in relation to business confidence and incidents. Measures of consumer trust in the FSA and the food they eat remain kind of high and stable, but we'd welcome views on whether our ambition for consumer trust should remain focused on maintaining these current levels, or whether there is a case for going further. So, as well as asking you to note the findings, we're really interested in your comments and your thoughts on these particular areas, and of course we will also come back next year with a further update on progress. Thank you.
Thank you, Emily. Obviously, first and foremost, really important that trust in the FSA remains high amongst consumers, or at least those who know us. And I do think we perhaps need to do more to explain what we do to a wider audience and really how we fit into the wider food system. That sort of awareness still perhaps isn't as high as I'd like it to be. And I am concerned about the signals around trust amongst small and micro businesses that may need attention. I think it's really important that we're not complacent about that. You're right, it may be just part of a wider decline, but we're going to have to step up our comms with them as part of implementing the SPS agreement. And I think that's a real opportunity for us to try to get a better understanding of their needs and to make sure that we are, supporting those businesses to do the right thing. It's one of our guiding principles. We meet very regularly and we hear a lot from the bigger organisations. And I'd be interested in the board's views on whether we can do more to engage more effectively and to support the small and micro businesses better. I think the other point, I mean, you make lots of valid points, incidents, foodborne disease and so forth. The other one that I just wanted to pick up on and interested to hear views from the board, you know, healthier and more sustainable diets. That's a big topic. We've always known that we mostly need to work in support of other government departments to deliver on that. And I can see very tangible opportunities for us to, well, we are already doing healthier diets in Northern Ireland. I can see real opportunities, as you say, with healthier food reporting and potentially with school food standards for us to do more on health over the coming year. I just wonder where we are on the sustainability piece, and I'd be interested again in the board's reflections on that. But enough from me. Let me open it up, and Anthony's first out of the traps on this one, but I can see there's lots of interest, so everybody will get a chance to speak. Anthony.
Thank you, Susan. An excellent paper, very detailed, an awful lot of detail in it. The Northern Ireland Food Advisory Committee discussed the paper last week, and they noted the very positive performance against the strategic ambitions, particularly the high public confidence, strong compliance levels and consistency across the nation. But we did, as has been mentioned here, highlight the areas for further consideration, including business confidence, emerging risk and sustainability, and thought that there was more that we should actually delve into. But they asked me to reflect two key points that they had. The first was they would like to understand better what guidance currently exists or should be developed in relation to consumers for key foodborne pathogens such as Salmonella, particularly in everyday context. And was there any evidence linking these drivers to risks at home? And the second area that they were particularly keen on was that, reflecting that the ambitions were set 2022, they wanted to know whether or not food security as a specific issue should feature more explicitly alongside sustainability, particularly in terms of production capacity, barriers to entry, and the cost pressures faced by industry. We also did note the nutrition work that we were doing and whether or not that could be further developed or even use Northern Ireland as a model that we could read across into the rest of the UK. But those were the key considerations.
Great, thank you. I suggest we, given there's lots of interest in this, we're going to go round the board and then I'll come back to you at the end, Emily. So Claire, and then I'll work my way up here and back round.
Thank you, Emily. I did want to pick up on the point about business trust, and I do appreciate that we do need to take this in the context of overall trust in government, etc. But I think it is worth a greater and more in-depth review of why this is, and whether it is linked to resource issues in LAs, whether it's around our comms, how we manage incidents, and whether it is really around the sort of level of support we can give if businesses do need help in getting standards up. So I do think this is something that we should spend more time on. And then the second is definitely around incidents. Whilst there's lots of positive indicators, I think the increase in allergen issues does definitely warrant more of a review, and certainly it links to what we've been seeing in the incidents paper, and whether that does link to some issues, particularly around labelling, manufacturing, control, etc. So whilst I think, you know, there's some really positive indicators, I think those are ones that do require more work. Thank you.
Thank you for the paper. It was really helpful. I'm going to concur with Claire and Susan in terms of the smaller businesses. That I suppose I'd like to just understand, what does careful monitoring mean? Because it does feel to me like we might need some more in-depth look to just really understand actually what has caused the decline, and particularly, as Susan sort of referred, with the SPS work coming through, actually we might need to be, and we will need to be, supporting there. I've got two other sort of thoughts, comments, where you talked about should we continue with our ambition as we are, or should we stretch ourselves? My view would be, we should always stretch ourselves. I think we should always aim to improve year on year as to how we're performing. And then my my third comment really was a reflection on the area. It was 5.6 where it talks about the self-reporting of people being more healthy and eating less processed foods. I just wondered whether we are able to do any connection to weight loss drugs, and where does the increase in weight loss drugs and people eating less of more processed foods, actually, is there any way that we can see whether that's a cause and effect? I suspect it'll take time to see that, but I think we need to just start to think, actually, what does that dynamic that's happening in people's behaviour have to how we're looking at food and tracking food?
Fiona.
Thank you. I'm going to pick up on a similar point on the small businesses. I think my concern about their not knowing about what Food Standards Agency does is the main red flag for me. They're the biggest business category by number in our sector, and they represent a lot of the small businesses that the local authorities are regulating, as well as the online businesses that are much harder to reach. So I think it would be very helpful if we could do a deeper dive to understand where those businesses get their information from, what kind of information they use to inform their business practice, and what their concerns are coming down the track. Because I think if we have a deeper understanding, that will really help us to tailor our communications and our other third-party engagements, particularly through local authorities. I think that also there are changes down the track which are going to have implications for them, which need to be managed very effectively. Then the other point, I was thinking about your question, your challenge to ask, how to lean into the sustainability and health areas. One of the things that is increasingly coming up in sustainability is the issue of resilience. We're doing work across government on resilience. With that, we're playing, we're contributing to that review on resilience in the food system. I think food security is the sort of headline for that. But I'm wondering whether we can now look at resilience, given that we've got a new directorate, and tackle some of the sustainability through that route. And it sort of goes to what you were saying, Anthony, is that, I think it's a similar platform.
Thank you. Yes, probably a bit more on the same theme, really. So looking at the healthy food and sustainability side, and looking at the questions that we pose to the public, I wonder if you've had any reflection on whether those could be improved or more nuanced now, because in fact they are quite broad and infer a judgment that I think doesn't sit well with how we see our broader communications, which are quite specific about supporting consumers and communities in making appropriate healthy choices. I guess I'd also declare an interest as a producer of food that because of their blanket approach, they could actually have negative impact on the growth agenda, particularly as it relates to food security. So getting the right level and the right messages suitably gauged, I think, perhaps now is something to relook at. And so your thoughts on it would be really helpful.
I'm going to go to Rian, who's joining us online, before I come down the other side of the board table. Rian, welcome.
Oh, thank you, Chair. Yeah, thank you, Emily and David, for the paper. I had a comment about allergen incidents, because we pulled it out in graphically in the paper, and I know this has a read across to the incidents paper, but you say in that our incidents in allergens are most commonly associated with labelling verification failures. And I'm interested in the data, and maybe this is an action, because you are asking us about incidents and whether any immediate action would be warranted. Are we seeing a rise in sampling failures within the allergen data? That's the first question. And then more generally, what are our insights into the rates of sampling more broadly as it relates to allergen? I think I'd be interested in that. and I wonder whether we're at the point where we want to set ourselves a tolerance for percentage increase on allergens incidence, in the same way as we do with foodborne disease, because it's small within the general incidence data, but it's significant enough, and obviously has, it's a really serious topic to consider. So a percentage tolerance on increase. So that's allergens. And then my second comment is on the sustainability point, because again, you're asking us, how we feel about that. And Susan mentioned at the beginning, our work in health is really proceeding apace. We had a discussion at the Welsh Food Advisory Committee recently on this paper, and sustainability, we don't have the remit, but also it's poorly defined. I think there's lots of ways to measure sustainability, but how we go about tackling that and whether we should move in that area any further, I'm not so sure at this point. Thank you, Chair.
Rhian, thank you for that. I'm going to suggest on your allergens points, which are points well made, that we pick those up under the incidents paper, because I think they're a bit more operational rather than the sort of strategy which I'm trying to focus on here. But if I don't do that, please do remind me. Let me keep coming around. Alison.
I'd just like to follow up a little bit on Rhian's point and some of the other board members' point about sustainability. It's a topic that is bedeviled by language and terminology and definitions, because one could argue that absolutely everything that the Food Standards Agency does is an underpinning primary goal within any sustainability strategy of any food business, that is, safe food, food you can trust, etc. I think that there is an argument for explaining a little bit more about what we mean about our contribution to more sustainability. I think, as you quite rightly said, Chair, our remit is beginning to expand, and we're being asked to comment and contribute in a wider range of topic areas that would come under even environmental pillar of sustainability, because traditionally you would have a strategy house with sustainability at the top as your overarching umbrella. You'd have an environmental pillar, an economic pillar, and an environmental, a social pillar underpinned by governance, communications, reporting, etc. So I think it's worth just exploring in Emily's new area what we actually mean and the areas we want to deal with it. But I don't think we can downplay it. It's a question, as Fiona said, of exploring carefully where one would want to put resources and expertise and where one would want to contribute to other agendas for influence and receiving knowledge.
Thank you. Frank, did you want to come in on this?
Yeah, thank you, Chair. Yeah, thank you, Emily. A very good report. And I was drawn, of course, to Ambition 3, and just to add to the voices, recognising that as an important part of our work. But I mean, it was clear to me from the report and other work, of course, that there is a very strong public demand for healthy food and for sustainable food. But that gives us a challenge, I think, going into the next strategy period, into the next business planning process, as to what we want to do as the FSA. Where do we want to position ourselves? Do we want to be a passive partner or a more active leader in this space? And I think that's quite a fundamental thing that we need to consider. I mean, there are some downstream things we need to think about. The indicators we're using are clearly not adequate, and so we need to think about improving those as well. And, if we do want to move into more of a leadership role in this space, I think we need to think about, because clearly we can't do everything alone on this, it's about partnerships. So we need to think about what are our models for collective impact, for having a collective impact across society. And I've got some ideas which I'd quite like to share with Emily at some point, probably offline on all of that. But I welcome report, and particularly the focus on Ambition 3. Thank you.
Thank you. Sue, did you want to come in on this?
Thank you. I don't think there's an awful lot more I can add, but I do think we should take more of a lead around sustainability. Certainly when we look at that consumer report, there was a very strong emphasis that they wanted to eat more healthily, but also people wanted to eat more sustainably. So decreased packaging, decreased food waste, eating locally, eating seasonally. And I would love to see those sorts of change embedded into some of the programmes that we're doing, things like our school food standards, whether that's something that could be embedded in there, something around the work that's being done in Northern Ireland, healthier food target reporting. I would just love us to grasp the nettle and address that a little bit more positively.
And Steve.
Thank you. Thank you, Chair. One thing which hasn't been mentioned, I was pleased to see in the mention of the work of the NFCU and the sort of the growing impact that's having in the sector. And I was also pleased to be at the CTSI Glasgow conference last week, where the NFCU did some good presentational work, summarising their activity, but also encouraging more partnership activity and sharing of intelligence. But in that section, it talks about the prospect of developing new metrics to understand the wider impact of the NFCU's work in terms of disruption, in terms of both protection and in relation to the economy. So I'd be interested, perhaps outside of this meeting, to find out more about that, and that might well lead back into this impact about how the work of the NFCU and the FSA supports growth. So that was one point. The second point gets related to Frank's point as well. In the report towards the end, it talks about revising the indicators for the future and a report coming to the board in the future. But I just wanted to be assured that the board would be involved and engaged in developing any new indicators which we would use going forward. So that was one thing. And then finally, just in terms of the priorities, I understand a lot of, in terms of the discussion which is taken forward. But for me, the health opportunities feel like a new and growing opportunity for the FSA to make a big impact, and hence the potential benefits and outcomes for health and society are seem quite clear, and there's a lot of interest and pressure in doing that. And the risk of trying to have too many equivalent goals is you become overstretched and you don't have sufficient priority dedicated to any of them. So my personal approach would be to work out those health priorities personally.
Wow, thank you. That has been an unbelievably useful discussion, and really on the back of an excellent paper. So a real thanks to the team for that. We clearly completely underestimated how much time we should set aside to have this discussion, and so we're not going to be able to bottom out many of the topics that have come up here. Two things I think come through very, very loudly to me. One is this work that we heard in some of the early comments around SMEs, and I think we do need to ask the team to go away and come back with some more detailed thoughts for us on how we respond to these indicators, what more we might do. So I think we'll just ask you to take that one away and come back with a more thoughtful, with the time to develop a more thoughtful response than you can do in the moment. And then the second one, which has really come through, I guess, in the second half of the comments, is this questions about our role in health and sustainability. And I was very taken by Frank's, are we a passive partner with others, which, we would never have described it like that. But, this was when we put healthier and more sustainable diets into the strategy, that was a new step. And we were sort of very conscious that it's not our policy area and we need to work in support of others. But I think on health, we're beginning to see how we are moving to being an active partner, if not the active leader that you were suggesting as a potential possibility. But we're certainly not there on the sustainability bit. This strategy is sort of coming to its end, and Katie and I have been talking about beginning to think about the next FSA strategy, and I think the time to pick up on those will be in those conversations rather than trying to make any particular adjustments right now. As we've heard, the health sort of programme is developing. I think there's been some really relevant and important points made about sustainability. When we developed it, we did have in our minds very much the environmental sustainability and climate change and so on. And I think what I'm hearing from the board is that looking ahead, we probably need to think about this in a much more broad definition, which is more closely linked perhaps to the resilience and food security agendas than we had done previously. But I think that's something probably for us to pick up in the next round of the strategy, rather than trying to do any major shifts now. Katie's looking slightly anxiously at me, but I don't know if you want to come in now or whether we should let Emily comment.
No, I was expecting Emily to say that in her response, but okay. Give her a chance to come back.
So those I think are the two headline things. There's a lot of smaller items. I think the point about GLP is very interesting, something we could monitor in Food and You, for example, or in our, not Food and You, in our consumer tracker. So yeah, great points. Incidents we'll come back to in the incidents paper, including the allergens point, I'd suggest, just in the interest of time.
Yeah, Susan, thank you very much, and thanks everyone for those really helpful comments. I'll try and keep this really brief at risk of not covering everything, but happy to pick anything up offline. I think, as Susan said, the thing that's come through really strongly, that point on trust and SMEs, I think we do need to go away. We've heard clearly to do a bit more in-depth work into why that is. Is it just part of a general trend? We shouldn't be complacent and assume that's the case, particularly as we head into a world where we are going to have to do a lot more communication with those businesses. So we will definitely take that away. And I heard very strongly the point about let's not make our goal maintain, let's make our goal improve. So we will make sure that we're thinking about that. We have started work on our new FSA strategy, and we're trying to think about how we make sure that gives us much clearer priorities and direction in a changing context and in a world that's different to how we were operating a few years ago. That will also give us an opportunity to test whether these are the right indicators, and absolutely we will want to think about what does sustainability mean, how is that healthier food target, school food standards work, shifting our perspective on health and our role in kind of healthier eating, and also that food security point, which right now is really important, and making sure that we're really building that into the work that we're doing. So that will also give us a chance to test the appropriateness of our indicators. Does the new strategy align with the indicators that we have? We were asked by the board a year ago to do a review. We've done a light touch one, but as Susan said, the time to properly refresh that and work with our third colleagues on the questions we're asking is as we develop our new strategy. Some really interesting points there as well around some of the things we could be looking at. That's part of that work as well. So things like weight loss drugs, and we'll absolutely take that away as well. And then the final point is we've picked up a very early question on foodborne diseases. I know we're not going into lots of detail on everything, but just to reassure, we are doing kind of some work on foodborne diseases, the causes and the influences, and that should give us a chance to really dive into that in more detail as well. So I hope that's covered at least at a very high level the points that were raised. And as I said, I'm happy to come back offline on more detailed points.
Great, thank you, Emily. So I think the action there is a briefing for the board on the SME point. I think on the healthier and particularly the more sustainable, that whole third pillar. We've got our FSA retreat in October. Probably seems quite a long way, but actually, given the summer break, it comes around very quickly. And I think that might be something that we should reserve some time to talk about in more detail then. I'm really sorry to cut this short, because actually I think this is an incredibly important paper and a real opportunity for the board to think about our strategic direction. But huge thanks to the team, but we're going to close that and move quickly on to the next item. Thank you. So the next one is a topic which we haven't discussed for a good while. The Risky Foods Framework. In fact, this was introduced in 2016, so 10 years ago, before any of us, I think, were board members. And so I thought it was timely to ask officials to bring this to the board, to really remind us what this framework is designed to do, how it's been used, and really for us to consider whether it's still an appropriate tool to use at all, and or if it needs any further development. So really pleased to be joined by James Cooper, who's our Deputy Director of Policy, who's going to talk us through this item. And I think, given that we're running a little bit late, I will stay for this intro, and then I'm going to have to hand over to Tim, really to chair the discussion on most of this item. So my apologies, I'm just going to have to step away. But James, over to you.
Thank you, Chair. So most food falls into one of two categories. They're either safe, provided that all the regulations and controls are and good practice are applied properly, or they present risks which are so high they are always unacceptable. The Risky Foods framework is designed to address the relatively small middle ground that sits between these two, where there's an intrinsic risk to the food or the consumption practice, even when it's produced and handled legally and hygienically within the law, that residual risk remains, and there's a tension between consumer protection and consumer choice. So such foods will be safe unless we do something beyond the standard controls. And what the Risky Food framework aims to do is give us a process to assure and check how we manage these foods and determine what that unless thing is. So there's relatively few foods that fall in this category, and only 2 have actually been fully taken through the framework. Less than thoroughly cooked burgers, in which case the unless was a mixture of strict sourcing and operational controls and consumer warnings, and raw drinking milk, and in that case the unless was direct sales to consumers, registration of producers, strengthened verification, and again clearer warnings for vulnerable consumers. So with all that in mind as to what's gone through with the framework and how it's been used over the last 10 years, what we're really asking the board is, does it feel the framework, where it's been used, is fulfilling its purpose, and is the board content the framework as a tool where it's required, or are there any changes the board would like to see with respect to the use and or content of the framework?
Great, thank you very much, James. I mean, I think the key point about this framework is that it helps us to crystallise the issues when we need to strike a balance between consumer safety and consumer choice. It's not often I talk about balance in relation to food safety, because we tend to think that that's, food needs to be safe. But I think the 2 examples you've given are a really good example where there's something about an individual consumer's own risk appetite and us allowing that freedom of choice. So I think this framework is really our opportunity to put the concept of proportionality into action. We have received 3 questions relating to this paper from the Hemp Hound company, which were really asking how the Risky Food framework might relate to FSA's consideration of hemp products. That's quite a specialised topic, and given we're quite short on time, I suggest we provide a written response rather than discussing those particular products right now, unless board members especially want to pick up on that. I am, however, struck by the fact we've only used this on 2 occasions. So I'm going to just log a couple of questions for you, James, although, apologies, I'm going to slip off. I was musing why we didn't use this when we were reviewing our guidance on the risk of listeria in cold smoked fish. I remember us having quite a lot of discussion about that and the issue of vulnerability and how age and so. And I wonder, in retrospect, whether you think that using this framework might have helped us frame those discussions or not. And the other point that I've been musing on since I read the paper is whether there was an opportunity to use this framework or something like it for incidents as well as for policy. So I'm just going to toss those 2 questions into the discussion, and I'm now going to hand over to Tim just to take over chairing until after the break. Sorry. Thank you.
Thank you. Yes, well, perhaps we could actually throw it open to discussion now, and I've got Frank and then Anthony.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you for the paper. I enjoyed reading it. I mean, the simple answer is I think we should retain the framework, probably as is. I don't know that it needs a huge amount of work. But I did feel, well, I found myself asking, is that middle ground that you described, James, is it actually broader than we think? And it could just be that these things have gone through, I recognise there's an initial screening process and then, before something becomes a high-risk food. And so maybe some of these things have gone through there. But you mentioned, Chair, the cold smoked fish. I was thinking about unpasteurised cheeses. I was thinking about not undercooked burgers, but uncooked burgers in the form of steak tartare, which seems to be on the rise as a food. And I have occasionally been offered undercooked pork, in restaurants, which rather surprised me and rather appalled me, So I wonder whether these things have been considered, or whether that middle ground is larger than we think, and we should be applying it more frequently. And the second point I would make is, well, to ask the question really, what kind of post hoc monitoring do we undertake? You know, what has been the actual impact of where we have applied it into occasions? You know, we've seen a rise in Campylobacter and Salmonella. We know that we're going to see that in the incidence report. Can we tie that back to some of the undercooked burger issue? What are the trends in brucellosis or TB, and are they reducing, or, you know, are we seeing an impact from the raw milk kind of being in this space? So those two questions really: is the middle ground bigger, and how do we monitor the impact here? Thank you.
Thank you. Anthony.
Again, I agree with Frank. We do and should keep the framework, but I did wonder whether there was a need for more consistent and centralised guidance, or maybe even a defined list of risky foods and associated controls. We've used it in two areas, but I think that middle ground, or that grey area, is bigger than we expect, and just about giving consumers guidance and choice so that they understand, because this is a tension between consumer availability, consumer choice, and I do think that there's more we could be seen to do just on associated risks and controls.
Thank you, Anthony. Claire.
Thank you. I, again, thought the framework made perfect sense, but I did have a couple of questions. That since that's been developed, you've obviously continued to develop other risk management processes. And if you were to retrospectively take raw milk, for example, and put that through one of your other processes, would you have got the same results, and therefore is it adequate, and therefore showing a level of duplication? And then also, if you look forward, once a new food system resilience directorate's in place, is there an opportunity to review this at that point? Because, you know, you're bringing all the risk processes and risk management more together. So it does look perfectly sensible and works, but we've only used it twice, so I was just wondering if that's because over that time other processes have sort of taken its place. Thank you.
Thanks, Claire. I've got Fiona.
Thank you, Tim. I'd like to add to that question, Claire, that you made. I mean, James, you referenced in the paper that there are other protocols that are used that generally deal with most of the other food categories. And so I just wondered to what extent the raw cooked burgers and any other raw or partially undercooked meat is covered. I mean, we do a lot of work around barbecue season, for example, in terms of consumer interface. The undercooked burgers is more of a food service issue, but how do we, are we managing without having to use the framework as an active preventative tool? I think it's a very good framework, and I think it'd be a pity if it disappears completely, but it feels to me like it's already sitting as a reference document in the background of our processes rather than something that needs to be used. And my understanding from the business committee conversations that we have is that the raw drinking milk is covered through the official controls process.
Thanks, Fiona. I've got Rhiannon.
Thank you, Tim. Yeah, my question is, so I think having the framework is very sensible. I think just making sure we look at it from the point of view of emerging trends and emerging risks is quite helpful, because we talk a lot about innovation and we support the development of innovative products. So maybe in terms of the future and how, if we're going to refresh it, we kind of give that innovation piece a little bit more focus, perhaps. And something that came up at WFAC last week was around supplements. And it is a question, really, how and would we apply the risky foods framework in the area of supplements and dosage? And I am genuinely asking the question because we weren't sure of the answer at WFAC, but it feels like it could be useful in that context. But yeah, be interested to know thoughts on that one. Thank you.
Right. I'm going to go back to James, but I think there's a few points to pick out, James, that, you know, I think what hopefully you're getting is a message of support around a framework like this functionally. But then I think there's also a little bit about scope and also, if you like, the fluidity of the issues that are going to impose on it. And so, you know, we're not just looking at the intrinsic food itself, but also the processes that contribute to it. We're looking at other questions that we're picking up elsewhere, whether that be through incidents and mechanisms that we already have. So is there a question around duplication to a degree? But there's also, I think, a question around equivalence of approach that's coming up in the conversation. So, for example, we pick up on issues like raw milk versus pasteurized milk, and also into other aspects of dairy processing. But if we were thinking about what are the implications of that, and Fiona picked up on this quite strongly, is where's the action beyond that and the preventative advice, then are we also applying the same approaches for things like slushies, which have been previous conversations, because the labelling is not equivalent between the two, and we see that having an impact on the ground. And I'm particularly caught by the comments that Rianne made as well around, given that scope of risky food, and the spectrum increasing, then do we need more nuanced response, whether that's around dose, safe limits, when actually already we've got a plethora of advice that we give out. So is that going to confuse things even more? So it's quite a lot of issues picked up. Yeah. I wonder if you could come back on some of those key points and then we can guide the discussion from there.
Yeah, I might be able to bring them together a little bit in a sort of more holistic way, because I think maybe the point that didn't quite come out in the paper and my introduction is that the framework itself was designed to be able to take an issue to the board where we need to step away from the board's standard risk appetite a little bit, and where some of those other tools don't enable that conversation quite as easily. And actually, Rian's actually spot on with the emerging trends. I mean, ultimately, partially cooked burgers and the rise of raw drinking milk were emerging trends that we identified that went, actually, this is going to grow. We need to think how we consider this and how it fits with our risk appetites. That's absolutely the kind of thing where this framework is designed for. Whereas when you look at sort of going to Susan's question around listeria, that was an incident where we had to make some very quick judgments that we could do within the board's existing known risk appetite. We weren't looking at whether we needed to tweak that risk appetite. So actually many of the thoughts and processes that underpinned it were exactly the same. They were just done on a more rapid scale with less need to get that sort of final view of where the risk appetite lies, because we knew where the appetite lies. So it's about balancing those consumer needs and the risk within that known appetite, rather than seeing whether we needed to stretch that a little bit. So in that sense, it's a very valuable tool in our box for a specific circumstance where we think that that stretch is required. And on some of this kind of, is the scope of these risky foods greater? I think that it is that first triage point as to whether we can examine this within our known risk appetite, or whether we need to actually say, we're not sure, that could be a stretch and therefore we might need to do it. I think there might be lessons we can learn and look at in terms of how we use it in relation to instance, and whether the logic of the thinking of it is something we want to bring into that process, or indeed whether the instance process reflects that. But I think it's that stretch and risk appetite is why this framework is particularly useful as a tool to get things to the board on a slightly longer, slower timescale. And just picking up on the point about the post monitoring, again, that's part of the question to the board, is what post monitoring do you think needs to be put in place in order for you to be comfortable that you are stretching a risk appetite. So on the raw drinking milk, for example, we do have a set of criteria which would result in the question coming back to the board if there was, growth in the industry or a certain number of incidents in a year, or whatever it might be. So again, it's part of the question is, what do you want that post-monitoring to be, to give you that confidence that while stretching your risk appetite, you're not going beyond your comfort zone.
Thank you. Anthony.
James, I think the sort of area that I was thinking of is, say, the growth in sushi that you can now buy in supermarkets, which are perfectly safe, perfectly fine. But do we give guidance to people in terms of the transport, how long it takes them to get from the shop to home to put it in a fridge? You know, it's that sort of guidance. The food itself, perhaps risky in the first instance, but then it's what happens in between purchase and consumption, and that makes it more riskier. You know, you have it in the back of the car with all your other shopping. It takes you 2 hours to get home. Is it still safe? It's that sort of guidance and that type of development of food, because our appetites are changing and our development of foods are becoming greater, and it's just thinking that bit ahead.
Thank you, Anthony. I'll just go to Frank, and then James, I'll revert to you, and then I'll wrap up.
Yeah, very briefly, not to labour the point. I mean, I suppose on the post hoc monitoring, with raw milk, it's banned in Scotland. You know, it should be relatively easy to see whether there's a differential burden of infection in England compared with Scotland, and that would give you an answer as to whether the framework is, or the allowing it, has increased risk for people in England. I think that those are the sort of things I would kind of be interested in knowing, and maybe we've done that work and I just haven't seen it. Thank you.
Okay, thanks. James?
Yeah, and that kind of work is done, and that's part of the post-monitoring, is the levels of incidence and the level of disease associated with it. On the sort of the sushi in the car point, again, it's a question of whether that is something where there is a stretch in the board's risk appetite required, or whether we know what the risk appetite is. We want people to transport their food safely, and actually that's on our list of things where we need to be issuing guidance the same way we do about transporting safe frozen food, or how quickly to put your leftovers in the freezer, that kind of thing. So again, there are many different tools we have in our box that we use in different ways. They all follow broadly the same set of questions, because that is what risk management is. This tool is designed particularly to draw out all those points the board would need to make that decision on their appetite on a particular, it could be a new trend or whatever the issue might be that comes up. But certainly we can, I'm getting a strong message the board wants us to look at things and ask ourselves the question, is this suitable for the risky food framework? Maybe a bit more often. We may well get the answer, no, it's better off done a different way, but I'm picking up that's the question we should be asking ourselves maybe a little more frequently.
Yeah, thanks for that. And I think it's right to go back and recap about what we were originally asking ourselves to, first of all, do we as a board continue to support the conclusions drawn from the framework, particularly on those two issues where it was used, and feel the framework's lived its purpose? And I'm getting a strong sense, yes. I think also, given the board's conclusion about that, the discussion on the applicability of the framework, should we retain the framework? And again, I'm getting a strong sense of yes, but also a little bit of testing around where it sits in our wider risk framework. Do we actually progress things through the risky foods framework so that it highlights the board's attention, but it moves then into the regular risk framework? So it's giving us if you like, a fairly fluid approach to be able to respond to new food trends. And I think that was picked up in Anthony's comment about sushi. I also think that there's opportunities perhaps to get slightly more curious about why some of the things are happening that we're experiencing under the risky foods framework. And I think that lends itself back to Frank's comment that if we can look for reasonable comparisons where there are differences in regime around regulation, that we can get learning from that and push that into the regular processes. And we see those through the business committee, for example, when we get reports and they're tested. So I think there should be a full confidence that we've got an integrated approach to this. Equally, I think that lends to us that we shouldn't make the framework a whole industry in its own right, over and above those regular processes. So I think prioritisation, recognising resource utilisation within the FSA becomes incredibly important. So I think we have a framework there that works well, continued support. James, you picked up very well on some of the things I think we'd just like to learn more about, but equally keeping it as that sort of fluid approach for basically board visibility, board scrutiny, and then get it back into the regular processes and have confidence behind that. Any other comments before I wrap up? Thank you very much indeed. Great conversation. I'd like to move on now to the annual Chief Scientific Advisor's Report. This is Ian's first annual report, and I really enjoyed reading it, and I think it really tantalised us of the things not only that have been done, but we can do. And on that basis, I'll invite Ian to present. We've got Rick Mumford, Deputy CSA, joins us online for this item. You know, thank you very much for a fantastic report. Do tell us more.
So thank you. And as you've indicated, this is my first report as Chief Scientific Advisor to the FSA. I've not been here for long, and I framed it very much in the context of, you know, initial views and insights. Reflects my personal opinion, not the opinion of CERD necessarily, but I was keen that that be fully understood. The report itself, I hope, is fairly self-explanatory. The first thing I want to say that it has become apparent to me very clearly that FSA is a science and evidence-led organisation and places value on science and evidence right from the top down of the organisation, but also throughout the organisation. And colleagues in policy equally place science and evidence at the centre of what they do, along with everyone else that I have encountered. And that has been a very positive and encouraging finding. Not only that science and evidence is viewed so highly, but also that there's a recognition of the breadth of what constitutes science and evidence. It's not just hard science and evidence, but social and behavioural science and understanding why people act and why businesses act in the way in which they do is also valued. There are strong support structures available to the organisation in terms of its scientific advisory committees, the Science Council and ACSS. I've reflected a little on the role of those and in particular what might be done to provide more focused, timely advice from the Science Council. Obviously, in the context of the SPS negotiations, there are likely to be some changes in what we require from our scientific advisory committees and potentially the ways in which they function, and that will form part of our review later this year. I am connected with the cross-government science network, and I've commented on the fact that the government chief scientist recently changed the way that operates, and to an extent I now sit outside the network, which I think is disadvantageous to FSA in a number of respects, and I will be discussing that with the government chief scientist, as I think we are better placed to be connected at that level as other levels with other government departments. Foodborne disease is something which has been considered in some depth previously by the board, and I've commented briefly there on the importance of data flows from UK HSA and the importance of ensuring that the pieces of work that we commission are clearly linked through to potentially actionable outcomes, either in terms of what we might do or what we do not need to do, and getting absolute clarity around that. I've talked a little bit about ultra-processed food. I suspect that's something the board could talk about for a very long time. It's clearly a topic of considerable public interest. FSA as a research funder is a small funder, but as an organisation potentially very influential in terms of setting the research agenda and identifying questions which other funders then can look to address. In addition, it's critical in that area that we're kept completely up to date, well informed about the huge amount of emerging evidence internationally, and particularly the potential for policy interventions in other countries and how those have been evaluated, what we can learn from them, and what their impact has been. Related to that, I've made some comments about the National Diet and Nutrition Survey. The FSA does not own the survey, but funds it in Northern Ireland, and therefore has a substantial interest in it. And I think there's an opportunity for further discussions about NDNS, how it's conducted, and how we can get maximum value from the information that is emerging in order to inform our activities. And indeed, the fact that FSA has that responsibility for nutritional advice in Northern Ireland offers an opportunity, I think, for FSA to view Northern Ireland as a test bed in order to assess the effectiveness of interventions of different types, which might then be considered elsewhere. And similar opportunities may arise in Wales, and I look forward to being able to discuss that with colleagues in Wales over the next few months. Data access and sharing, clearly a critical issue. I've highlighted a couple of important points there, particularly access to data from industry, which is something that we're exploring, but which has some sensitivities, and then linkage of data more effectively in the health space through the New Health Data Research Service, whether there are any opportunities for us there which might help to inform our response, in particular to foodborne disease. Contaminants, I mentioned briefly, particularly PFAS and microplastics, and then discussed external relationships in the wider world. There's already been reference to the importance of our relationships in Europe, particularly in the context of SPS, and following any changes there, I anticipate that will require considerable effort and commitment on the part of scientists within FSA as well as others to ensure that we have an active and effective voice to influence decision making in the future. And then the role in communications. And I've made a number of recommendations which are just at this stage for the board to note and consider, but I'm very happy to answer any questions or hear any comments on any of those issues.
Thank you very much, Ian. Yeah, fantastic that you've picked out the areas that you've covered, and also in terms of the recommendations. And I just, before opening up for wider conversation, just wanted to pick up on Ian's point about having the cross-governmental influence, because we alone cannot achieve the breadth of research, commissioning research, and indeed the resourcing that on our own. It's got to be done in concert with other government bodies and other agencies. And so actually having the influence to get that agenda prioritised becomes vitally important. So I'm very pleased to see that you're already asserting our need to do that with colleagues across government. So can I open it to wider conversation? I've got Anthony, Sue. Well, I'll work down this table first, but let's start with Anthony, Sue, and then Frank, and then I'll come back. And I've got Rhiannon as well.
Thank you, Tim. Tim, just following on from your following point, for me, the key issue in this entire paper, and it's an excellent paper, Ian, very well done, especially for your first one, is the fact that we are now excluded from that key group of CSAs within government. We're a small organisation, but we're a vital organisation, and I look at the work that we are doing and will be doing, particularly in regard to the SPS agreements and all the work that will flow from that, but also in issues like green blue algae in Lough Neagh, and where we've taken a key lead and we've really helped people understand what's happening. For us not to have a seat at that table, I think, is a huge mistake, and I think I would like to call on the chair, the chief executive, to use their own networks to get a review of that decision, because I really do think, given the key government departments we work at, given food security and the very key role that we play, we should be at that centre table. So that was the first point. And the second point was, again, just to endorse the comments that Ian made regarding using NI, particularly our nutrition and sustainability remit, as a test bed that we can actually use to try out some things, and actually then just talk to the government departments England and Wales that have responsibility for those areas. So thank you. Excellent paper.
Fantastic. Thanks, Anthony. I've got Frank next.
Yeah, thank you. I mean, I similarly lament the non-engagement of our chief science officer. It's actually a change which was made, I think, about in 2020 or thereabouts. So it's not a recent change, but it's something that's affected other scientific advisors in the developed nations. And I agree, Anthony, it's probably something that if you can't make traction on, Ian, then it probably needs escalating through various routes. But I also welcome, your initial thoughts. Thank you for those. Really good to see them. And I was interested in the refresh of the Science Council and how that might work. Like you, I've sat on various scientific advisory committees, and I've always found that the best process is where they partly set their own agenda and partly have the agenda set by the organisation that they're reporting to, in this case the FSA, of course. So I just wonder where you feel that balance should be, where that balance is at the moment and where you feel it should be, and how we kind of make sure that that's as functional as it can be. So thank you for that.
Thanks very much indeed. Sue.
Thank you, Tim. Thank you, Ian. It was a fantastic report. I really enjoyed reading it. It was great to see the huge numbers of research projects that the FSA is undertaking, which is really heartening in some really relevant subjects. But my question really is around foodborne disease. And I think it's really interesting when we're looking at these increased levels of incidents with Campylobacter and with Salmonella, and they've exceeded our thresholds. But you very pertinently point out that the methods that we're using for detection of positive cases is now based on molecular techniques, so PCR rather than culture. And you absolutely hit the nail on the head when you talk about having access to more data. So my question is, we've identified 6 different hypotheses as to why we may have this increased risk. Could this just be down to increased sensitivity of the techniques we're using? And should we wait to get that data and therefore potentially adjust our thresholds rather than spending time and money and resource in doing investigation, which may actually be not a good way to use our resources?
Thank you very much, Sue. Louise, and then Claire.
So I'm going to sort of reiterate that I really enjoyed reading the paper, and I think it always shows how sort of fresh eyes into an organisation can just reflect and have the opportunity to reflect and advise. So I thought that was really helpful. I was just going to pull out 3 areas where I thought was particularly good for reflection, really. I do think ultra-processed foods and your comments on that and what can we learn internationally would be helpful. And then I think there's something between where you're talking about speeding up data and trends and connecting that, I think, with AI and how can we use AI to help us speed up, because quite a lot of the data that we look at is often 6 to 8 months or 12 months old, and actually it might be helpful if we could speed that up through the use of AI.
Very good, thank you. Claire.
Thank you. Really interesting report, and similarly to Louise, I was really interested in your thoughts around UPFs, and I'm sure it's something that as a board we will want to continue to talk about. And I appreciate your approach to having a key role in terms of influencing funding and the trials and tests that are taking place. I just wonder at what point we feel that there is actually more of a risk to health through the sort of additives, contaminants point, and therefore we have to take more of a proactive approach given our role as a regulator. And I guess that probably links to some of the strategy questions we've been having. And then my second point was really around access to health data, particularly with industry, and how we could speed that up. And it feels like there's a lot of work going on currently with industry around various programs that we've already got in place and how we can use those relationships to potentially start to make some progress in that area.
Thank you very much, Claire. I'll wrap up. I'll take Rhiannon and then I'll come to Fiona. Rhiannon.
Thank you, Tim. And thank you for the report. It's great to have a first read of your impressions. It was just a question, and thank you for coming to the Welsh Food Advisory Committee meeting last week, even though you did so from international waters. A comment that was raised at WFAC and is always raised at WFAC, and I feel needs airing, is about the public analyst capacity. So sampling, I know it's not in your report, but sampling, underpins a lot of what we do in the science and evidence function. And it was raised again about the sustainability of the public analyst profession. And it's a key risk that we don't have the number of professionals in that part of the system that we might like. And I'm just interested in your thoughts on whether you see, where does that sit in your initial reflections, and can we have a focus on that going forward, perhaps? Thank you.
Thank you very much, Fiona.
Thank you, Tim. Again, from me, an excellent report. Thank you, Ian, and very succinct recommendations on the last page. I just a couple of comments, really. I'd be interested to hear what your recommendations are for how we can work more closely in partnership with other government departments and across the scientific community, where our strengths lie and where we can potentially consider collaborative and co-funded projects where FSA can take a lead. We've had recent success with PathSafe. We've, I think, done a very good and important piece of work around the science for our precision fermentation and the cell-cultivated meat. So I look forward to hearing a little bit more about what the opportunities might be there. Going back to the Chief Scientific Officer's table, my assumption is that we probably need to have a voice there in order to be able to also then have a strong voice when we have to start to engage in Europe. And our science and engaging on our science and our evidence is going to be a really key part of representing UK interests as that as that whole system starts to move forward. So it was really just to flag a concern that we at the moment are not potentially able to represent what in a way that we need to.
Thank you very much. Steve.
Thank you, and thanks, Ian. Yeah, excellent report. In your introductory remarks, you talked about science and evidence, including social and behavioural science. Obviously, this report's early impressions, it focuses on the science, if you like. I just wondered your reflections on that social and behavioural science element, and how whether it could be included in future reports such as this, or whether the board should be looking elsewhere for feedback in relation to the outcomes in relation to that work. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Ian, for a really interesting report. And as a non-scientist, can I commend the plain English and the easy to understand it? And that is a very serious and heartfelt comment. And it relates to my question. I would really like to know a little bit more about item 12 in terms of science communication, and what your thoughts would be in terms of working with Claire's team in terms of supporting and developing a larger cohort of really articulate science communicators, tailoring to different audiences and for different messages and for different occasions.
Thank you, Alison. Well, can I just thank everybody for a fantastic range of contributions. Wow, Ian, that's there's a lot in there, and I just wanted to get your response to a number of the issues that have been raised. I think one of the things that's come out, notwithstanding the recommendations, but a particular focus around concerns on where there's scope to push some boundaries. And I think we heard that, whether it was around the testing sensitivity and what we're interpreting from that, whether it's the opportunities around both industry and other government department collaboration, and can we can we push that even further than we have in the past? Because certainly, as I said in the opening, we can't do it all on our own. And the scientific community, the opportunities for innovation and actually for validating the approaches and concerns that we express. We've just had the conversation around the risky food framework, for example. Where does that go? And then how do we inform that process? It becomes vitally important. And then there's a little bit about widening the scope in respect of social and behavioural science. And I'd add into that, I think, also the science around economics of demonstrating and giving compelling reason for when we're actually trying to make the case, not just with other government departments and with Treasury, but also to the wider communities about how persuasive our information should be, so that the communication of that can be improved. And of course that was picked up in the comment about science communication that was just made, not just the plain English of it, but also can we do it in a way that becomes compelling. Haven't lost the part around that sets a wide agenda, and as Rhiannon picked up, there is a wider issue around the sort of capacity that we have to manage that, touched on around collaboration. And then we got a couple of big outstanding kind of issues in the room, which revolves a lot around potential contaminants, and we talk about plastics, and we got roll around recycled plastics, for example, but also the big one about UPFs and where we might go with that and the scope of that. So I almost feel apologetic it's so broad, but I think actually that's a positive outcome of what's a great report. So if you could just give some indicators on that, and then we can move forward.
Yeah, I'll respond. I'll respond very briefly to some of those issues, and then we'll be happy to pick up separately conversations with board members. Firstly, to assure you that although I'm not currently connected with the CSA network across government, I do meet bilaterally with other key CSAs. That is a way of addressing some of the cross-departmental issues, but I think it does disadvantage us not being part of the broader network. So hopefully that is something where we can persuade the government chief scientist that it would be useful to all of us. In terms of the Science Council, which was referenced, I have had some very productive meetings with John as the chair of the Science Council, and we've agreed, and I agree with the comment that was made, that in part we should be commissioning work from them and give them clearer and more focused commissions to which they'll respond more rapidly, but also that they should be bringing forward ideas and suggestions. And we've discussed the importance of creating time in their agenda for open discussion, where Science Council members highlight areas that they think we should be considering from a science perspective. And I've had a similar conversation with ACSS in the social and behavioural sciences space. Foodborne disease, it's a really good point. I could talk about the testing. I could talk about that at some length. It's something I'm particularly interested in. In Northern Ireland, specifically, where there's been a consistent testing regime, which is molecular, there hasn't been any notable increase in the foodborne disease, which is interesting. In Wales, I was told that despite consistent testing, which I'm still trying to clarify, there has been an increase. And the view of our various expert committees that it was a partial contributor to the increased numbers that we're seeing, but not the whole explanation, which is why we're looking at the other hypotheses as well as this one. In terms of ultra-processed food, again, we could talk about that for a long time. I'm pleased to say that thanks to Rick's efforts in particular, we'll be appointing a policy fellow for the next year specifically to help us with oversight of international developments in this area. I think there's an important question which I suspect may come back to the board about the extent to which there's clear risk associated with ultra-processed food in a way that might consider that FSA might wish to consider whether there's a need for any action, as some other countries have decided. I don't personally think there's going to be any transformative change in the evidence base in the near future. We may have some nuanced, increased understanding. Clearly, there are associations between ultra-processed food consumption and a range of adverse outcomes. Those may well be largely attributable to high saturated fat, salt and sugar content of those foods. There may be a contribution from the characteristics of the food in terms of how palatable it is, how quickly we eat it. There may be a contribution from additives in it, but all of that remains uncertain and will remain uncertain for the foreseeable future. Health data and sharing will be very important. There's significant work being done through Quadrum in Norwich in terms of access to industry from data. We're in discussions about that, and in the health space, the source of data will be from probably Health Data Research Service in the future, and I've suggested that we should engage with them to understand what opportunities might exist in that space. Public analyst capacity, which was raised by Wales. I'm not an expert on it. Rick would be much better placed, I think, than me to comment on that, but it is an issue that's been mentioned. Rick, I'm not sure if you'd want to comment briefly on that.
Yeah, thanks, Ian. I'm happy to do so, and it's a very valid point, Rhian. We've known for some time that the public analyst labs have been struggling in the UK, or certainly in England and Wales in particular, because of basically the sheer number of local authority samples have gone down, and that was their bread and butter for sustaining and investing in the future. So what we have done, and we have been since 2019, we've been investing money into public analyst laboratories in England and Wales through a number of different programs. So that's been targeted sampling programs, surveillance programs that are delivered through them. It's also through method development, capability building. So we have grants programs that have gone to PA labs in England and Wales, but also specifically to your point about PA training, we've also been supporting public analyst training. And last time I saw numbers, they were pretty good. The number of people actually in that program has increased. So there are more people being trained. Now, that is not to say there aren't still challenges. And one of the things we're doing is talking, for example, to the Royal Society of Chemistry, who maintain the PA qualification, the MChemA, and we're seeing if there is the possibility to do some revision on how that is done to make that more fit for purpose for the 21st century. So absolutely right, it is a key issue. They are a critical part of our food safety mix in the UK, and we need to support them, and we're happy to do so.
And finally, very briefly, absolutely, I think we should be pushing boundaries in terms of what we can do in science and evidence terms. I think that as an organisation, FSA is a limited funder, but has the potential for considerably greater influence and impact on larger funders. I think we should push the boundaries in terms of that to try to maximise the volume of useful evidence that's available to us. That will include co-funding arrangements, and it will include consideration of what can be done in the social and behavioural science space, where and I'll be talking to ACSS about that. And very finally, absolutely, I'm talking to Claire and her team about the role I and other scientists can play in terms of communication, and have engaged in particular with the Science Media Centre, but we'll also be looking at other opportunities, and we'll be pushing forward with that in the latter half of this year. So,
thank you, Ian. Really exciting, and it certainly hit the ground running. So fantastic and well done. I think you've heard strong support around trying to bring more power to your elbow on the CSA network, and if necessary for the chair and Katie to get engaged with that, but obviously allow you to do your piece first. And thank you for coming back on all the various comments raised. I think we're going to see more and more interest around UPFs, and I think your point's very valid. There's a wider spectrum of consideration there, but equally UPFs are just not one breed of food types, and actually perhaps being more nuanced around what looks to be at risk and having the research and support to understand that is going to be a vital part of our step forward. So I think on the whole, there's strong support around the recommendations in the report, but of course the next step is around what are the practical plans that come in behind that, which I think will be really pleased to be able to see as we go forward. So can I thank you again for a fantastic report, and thank everybody for a very engaging and productive conversation around the report. And that brings us to the conclusion of the first part of the board, and I think we go into a coffee break. And we come back at, well, we're a little bit running a bit late, so I think if we come back at 11:30, thank you very much.
So welcome back, everyone, and thank you very much to Tim for chairing in my absence. I look forward to catching up on those discussions this evening. We're turning now to the annual report on incidents and resilience. So delighted to welcome Darren Whitby, who's Head of Incidents and Resilience, to join us, and I can see James Cooper here with us as well on the policy side. So I think I will just let you kick straight off. Darren, why don't you just summarise the paper for us? Thank you.
Thank you, Susan. So, yeah, thank you, everybody. The paper covers activity across the full incident management chain, from prevention and signals through to resilience and response. We managed just over 2,000 incidents, so that's a 14% rise on last year, but it is broadly in line with previous year's averages. High and medium priority incidents are rising, reflecting both increased demand and a shift in the complexity of risks. So these are being shaped by a global food system with reliance on cross-border supply chains, online marketplaces, and multi-agency coordination. As a result, incidents are more complex, prolonged, and require greater collaboration, both nationally and internationally. And in response, our focus has been on maintaining delivery, whilst strengthening and modernising capabilities to meet both the current and future demands. So within that delivery, over the past year, we've made some important improvements across our incident response and resilience capability. Central part of this has been implementation of PRISM. So that's our new incident case management system, which has improved data quality, transparency, and our oversight across the full incident lifecycle. And this has given us a much stronger operational grip and assurance. I think that's particularly in the more complex incidents. Another key area of work has been reviewing how we classify the incidents. So the previous approach was a little bit outdated and no longer reflected the data-led, evidence-based response that's required. So during the last year, we've refreshed the classification matrix using some clear parameters, looking at the potential health impact, product distribution, and then some of the non-health impacts such as supply chain resilience and consumer confidence and urgency. So that updated matrix is now operational. There are some ongoing refinements, and we'll continue to develop this approach and the supporting tools over the coming year. And this will be embedded within the new incident operating model as part of FSA Ready, with any sort of potential implications for local authorities are to be considered within that project. We've strengthened our surge capacity, including the development of our emergency response model first, enabling us to respond more effectively to large-scale incidents or concurrent incidents, and to help us maintain resilience when under pressure. Root cause analysis is now embedded more systematically, not just as a retrospective tool, but it's also as a way of identifying systemic drivers of risk and using that insight to inform prevention activity and with industry and with other partners. It's actually a really important step in moving past our sort of individual incident management towards a system-wide learning and intervention. And then finally, we've invested in readiness and capability. We've delivered an ambitious exercising programme, strengthening leadership capability and processing a growing volume of signals and intelligence to support earlier identification of risks. So what does this mean? So the report's clear that the system we're operating in is becoming more complex, less predictable, more data rich, and that means we need to continue evolving. We're trying to shift that dial from a model that is predominantly reactive to one that increases focus on prevention activity, preparedness, and system resilience. So that requires us to make better use of data and intelligence to identify risks earlier, intervene upstream, and then reduce the likelihood of those risks escalating into significant incidents or outbreaks. So looking ahead through the FSA Ready programme, so the creation of the new Food System Resilience Directorate will bring together our intelligence, resilience and response capabilities with the key areas of LA engagement, and it will strengthen our ability to identify and respond to system risks. Within that, we'll establish a risk and intelligence hub, which will consolidate what is currently fragmented intelligence streams and provide a stronger unified capability for risk identification, importantly prioritisation and then decision making, and that will be underpinned by improved data integration and sharing. We'll also develop a new incident operating model which will clarify roles, the escalation routes and decision making structures across the organisation and with our partners, and that'll enabling a more sort of coordinated, scalable and effective response. Tech, as in technology, will be a key enabler in this transition. So building on PRISM, we will introduce digital triage tools and some automated, sometimes AI-assisted classification, and that should help us manage this increasing volume more efficiently and consistently. So in summary, the report reflects a year which we've had sort of managed increased demand and complexity, delivered some improvements in capability and resilience, and then laid the foundations for a more preventative and intelligence-led approach. But I think it also highlights that there are strategic choices ahead about how we prioritise our effort, how we work with our partners, and then where and how we can add the most value across the system. So many thanks and take any questions.
Great, thank you very much, Darren. I mean, I think you report and what you've just said really does bring home that this has been a year of sort of increasing volume, increasing complexity of incidents, and really grateful to you and the team for all you've done to stay on top of those. We heard earlier about the really good work that was done on the infant formula recall. You know, that was a high profile event, and I think it's important that we remember that it's not just high profile events, there's a whole mass of other events go on all year, so really grateful for that. I suppose one of the things that I am really encouraged by is the recognition that we need to do more on prevention and system resilience. That is, you know, a great and important ambition. I'd love to see it happening, but given the pressures that you're under, how is that really going to become a practical reality? And I wonder if you could maybe say a little bit more on that before I open it up to the rest of the board for questions.
Yeah, of course, Susan. So, yeah, we recognise that, and what we've been trying to do is to plan some resource in initially on a temporary basis, but I think it's about sort of trying to recognise that sort of requirement ahead from a system resilience and a prevention point of view. So we've allocated some additional protected resource so that we're not encroaching on our response function. So we're able to maintain delivery, but we're putting some additional posts in, looking at system resilience, working with DEFRA, Cabinet Office and others in that sort of system resilience space. And also from a prevention point of view, we're just in the process of recruiting some extra posts to look at root cause analysis and aligning with the work ahead as part of the Risk and Intelligence Hub and with the new directorate approach.
Okay, I think when those new posts are in and that sort of unit and function is sort of set up, it would probably be helpful just for us to have some informal update, I think, to the board on what that looks like. Otherwise, it's going to be a year before we sort of come back to thinking about this again. So it would be nice to see this a bit more on the direction of travel.
That might be something we could do at a retreat. I'm quite keen to enable Claire when she comes in to take stock and decide how she thinks she should be structuring her directorate. So we're deliberately moving into a sort of interim state, but as Darren says, I've made some more resource available in the meantime. So it'll be an ongoing process.
Okay. Let's, yeah, I mean, the retreat's definitely a potential opportunity, or we can find some other space. I'm not suggesting it comes to a board meeting, but I would quite like to hear about that prevention work rather than waiting a whole year to get back to the annual report.
If I may, Chair, just on that, so we will also pick it up through our business committee and ARAC because of the performance framework that we're developing. So alongside bringing in that extra resource, we are starting to think about what are the metrics and KPIs that will demonstrate how effective we are at that.
Okay, great. Yeah, business committee is an obvious place to build that in. Good. So questions, comments from other board members on this item. And Frank, you're our board lead for incidents, so I'm going to let you lead off.
Yes, thank you very much, Chair. And thank you, Darren, for the report, which I enjoyed reading. I mean, I was very struck by the, you know, as the chair has said, by the increase in frequency and complexity and all of that. And, you know, it underlines the fact that this is core, absolutely core business for us to get right within the FSA. So it was good to read all of that. I suspect, actually, that those trends will continue. You know, as Susan mentioned earlier about the rise in molecular testing and leading to, you know, greater numbers of signals and incidents, etc. And I suspect that we'll see more outbreaks as well because of the increased use of genomics in the NHS. So I think that trend will continue. But my questions were, I mean, we have to kind of remember that we did have, I think it was 2 years ago now, wasn't it, Anthony, when we had a limited assurance around some of our incident work. And so it'd be good to, I know we'll look at that through ARAC, but I see that the revised incident operating model will go some way to kind of addressing some of the concerns that were raised in there. But I didn't see when that might be in place. When do you think that will actually be fully functional? And then with regard to the new directorate, we've had quite a lot of discussion, I think, before you joined us, Darren, about the need to resource issues around healthy food, but also around food security, food resilience. So resourcing is an issue, and it's good to hear what you say about the kind of personnel coming in to deal with that. But there's also a question, I think, about partnerships and the partnerships that we need to build, particularly around food security, partnerships with, presumably with DEFRA, with UKHSA and all those. And so if you could say something about the partnership working that we are engaged in and how we're going to build that would be very helpful as well. Thank you.
Good. And I'm also conscious we, earlier today, Rian was asking about allergens in relation, from the strategy paper, the rise in the number of incidents that have seemed to be coming through through our sampling programme on allergens. So I want to pick that up in the discussion as well. We haven't forgotten that one. Anthony.
Thank you. Darren, at NIFAC, when we discussed the paper, some of the points that were coming out was, had we considered the impact of changing food trends, such as the increased use of high protein ingredients, such as nuts, and whether that was having an impact either on allergen risks or incident trends, and also whether demographic changes such as aging and potentially a more vulnerable population was being considered when you're analysing the data, because you did say this is now becoming an even more rich data environment and our access to it. And just maybe one note of maybe caution, given that we may have an SPS agreement in the not too distant future, should we hold off making any changes to how we manage incidents to understand what is coming down, whether there is an impact of any SPS on that? Maybe not, maybe we just move forward, but those were just three of the points that we discussed at NIFAC.
Thank you. Claire and then Louise.
Thank you very much for the report. I wanted to just go back to something that I mentioned in one of the last papers around the link between labelling and allergens, and I was really pleased to see you talking more about root cause analysis. And there's clearly some link with regard to manufacturing processes in this case, but also it seemed to be more predominant in cereals, bakery, and whether we can just get under the skin of that, because that's clearly a really important risk, particularly with regard to gluten. And then the second point was, you talk a lot about having more resource to be able to, or needing more resource to be able to be more proactive. And you did towards the end of the paper talk about how you're considering the FSA's coordination and advice role on low priority incidents. And I was just wondering if you could just elaborate a little bit on what that might look like and how much resource that would actually free up. Thank you.
Thank you, Darren. Mine's more of a thank you, really. I suppose I'm looking forward to the Resilience Directorate coming in and actually that coordination of pulling all those departments together, because I think it will give us more ability to understand, maybe be more preventative and understand what is happening. But at the same time, actually, I think just having come out of Ian's report and chief scientific piece, actually, how do we make sure that we are connecting Ian's initial thoughts with actually a new directorate's thoughts and making sure we do get real sort of clarity, and this is how we can actually move forward.
Really good points. Steve and then Fiona.
Thank you. I really enjoyed reading the report as well, and particularly welcome the shift to the creation of the Risk and Intelligence Hub and the more preventative and intel-led approach. I think that fits in with the overall direction of travel that we're looking for. A couple of sort of specific queries. One in 5.7, we talk about a tension between the shift in direction and the potential to inadvertently deliver pressure points elsewhere in the system, particularly to local authorities. I just wondered if you could say a little bit more about what that might mean in practice, and also whether there's a process to engage with those most affected to minimise the negative impacts of that. So one specific query. And then finally, I was really pleased to see the case studies as well. I found them quite illuminating, actually, to see the practical examples of the work. So appreciate that. A particular query in relation to some of the sort of elements of the signals section. We talk about the need to take down websites in inappropriate circumstances, and we talk about prompt removal of effective online listings, which is really important. I just wondered whether there's an issue similarly with other areas of problems with online listings, where a recurring problem with platforms is that you can identify a specific listing that is problematic. The online platform will agree to withdraw that or remove that listing, but do little or nothing to prevent similar listings appearing or the same products being listed. How's that engagement working with the platforms and or the rest of the enforcement community to make sure that that impact doesn't relate to just a specific listing, and therefore it may not address the problem but just the listing?
And Fiona?
Thank you, Susan. Thanks, Darren. It's a very excellent summary of a huge area of work, very comprehensive. My questions generally relate to how we work with industry on signals and them playing their role in keeping the system safe. Picking up the point about online, it's a really difficult area to manage and control. And do you think we can take a strategic approach to how we work with the online sector? I mean, the case studies are really great examples of the FSA at work, and they demonstrate that we can be effective in that sector. So, but I'd be interested to hear, as we develop plans for the future, how we can really focus on online, because it is a very risky area. I'm also interested to understand how much intel sharing comes back into us from industry. We share a lot of communications out, but are we getting stuff coming back into the FSA which help us with our management process of the risk? Equally, if the Science Council are looking at large-scale events and how they could cascade risk through incidents. Are we including industry in that review? Because I think it'd be really interesting to understand how some of the larger players who've got global supply chains are considering that. I mean, their science and their performance and their business is really affected when something goes wrong, as we've seen with the infant formula as an example. Thank you.
Just a very brief one from me, and just to say I was very pleased to see the root cause analysis data, and to actually be able to break that down raises my curiosity about what's behind it and what are the trends and what are the patterns. And I sort of juxtapose that to the earlier conversation around the risky food network. So it would be quite useful to understand whether those trends are issues intrinsic to the food types or to the processes and systems that support them, because obviously our response needs to be gauged accordingly to understanding the root cause. And so a little bit more on that over time, not necessarily now, but would be very useful, because it certainly, if we're looking towards resilience and managing that risk, then being able to make the understanding out of that is going to be vitally important.
And Rhian.
Thank you, Chair. I think Tim just beat me to it, actually. So my comment was also about the root cause analysis. I think it's really valuable data set to be presented with. So thank you for that. I suppose I do notice in the detail that there's quite a jump under the nuts and undefined category for root cause analysis in this report. And outside of this meeting, perhaps it would be really helpful to have a bit more on that. Is it that food businesses are really now good and very practiced at doing root cause analysis for that category of nuts generally, and because we've seen it, we see it quite a lot perhaps, and how do we validate the root cause analysis data from industry? How do we work with industry, and do we sample root cause analysis data to do a double check, or how does that work? It'd be good to understand more.
Great. Wow. A lot of stuff there. So, Darren, I suppose some of the big kind of chunky things there, I think people are keen to hear a little bit more about how the new incident management functions, the Risk and Intelligence Hub, a bit more about that, a bit about timelines, comments about the interaction with SPS, if any. I think a significant piece around allergens and what are we doing in that space. It's a topic which is really important to the board, and it feels like, despite all of our efforts, despite what feels like much greater awareness out there, we're still not getting that right. What more can we? And then something around enforcement actions. How does this actually work? And then the point that Tim and Rhian have just made around the root cause analysis. Those felt like, and partnerships. I mean, Frank talked about partnerships with people like UKHSA and some of our sort of health system partnerships, but also Fiona's point about industry. And maybe that's the one I'd quite like to hear most about today, because that's going to be vital for our move towards more prevention, particularly the information sharing piece. So, yeah, over to you.
Yeah, thanks everybody. Thanks for the questions and the comments. So to start with the point of the instance operating model and that sort of interaction across the piece. So that's due to kick off imminently within this quarter. So that will run for approximately 12 months. It will be built around that sort of understanding of system resilience as well, working with the likes of DEFRA, UKHSA. We've got a particular reference within that instance operating model around how do we collectively manage the issue of foodborne disease. So everybody's got a part to play within that chain. So there is a working group with UKHSA and ourselves that we're looking at, but that's certainly within scope of the incident operating model, so we do expect some progress on that. When we speak about the system resilience element and the whole point of food security, and I think somebody referenced the Science Council, that's very much part of our thinking. It's actually a fast evolving area. I think everybody's had sort of one eye on it previously, but I think with recent developments, I think that's very much more in focus across government and with industry as well. So part of the reason why we're applying that additional resources, recognising that need to work across multiple government departments and with industry. And again, there was a reference there around sort of what are industry doing at that. We're trying to build our stakeholder engagement with, particularly with some of the larger industry players on this. They do look at system resilience. They are looking at the emerging risks from their own perspective. So we're trying to build in that interaction and sharing of intelligence and understanding. And to raise the point from the Science Council, yes, we've been working with the Science Council around ensuring that that industry point is built into the discussions and the thinking of the Science Council in the future. The point on the allergen sampling, whilst we're reporting it from a sort of an incidence level point of view, I'm probably going to turn to James from a policy point of view about that sort of forward look, thinking about this from a sort of burden point of view and going forward. So I don't know if you want to cover that point now, James.
Yeah, so on the allergens, incidents are one of the indicators that's important for allergens, but it's not the only sort of really important piece of information in this area. With regards to the specific numbers in the report, the numbers have gone up, but actually there's also the change in reporting where incidents have started having potentially primary and secondary tags put them on them, and we think that change in reporting accounts for the majority of the increase in those allergen incidents. For example, things like Dubai chocolate, where there are risks both from mycotoxins and undeclared allergens and those kind of things in there. So I think most of it is a numerical reporting issue. I think the point that Claire made around the labelling and the root cause analysis Ria made is really important. I think with the allergens, I think about half of them are undeclared allergens, another quarter is mislabelling problems. So the root cause analysis is very important there in directing us to where we need to be looking at efforts in terms of what we're doing work around this. And just reflecting quickly, Rhian, on your earlier point about a threshold for allergens, I think this is different from foodborne disease. The raw numbers have a different implication that isn't necessarily an illness at the point of the incident. It can be detected for other reasons. And actually, your point around the nuts, that some of the increases can be because it's look more, find more. So actually, finding more allergen incidents could actually be a measure of success rather than a problem. So we need to be careful how we look at sort of thresholds around these numbers, but monitoring the level of incidents and the risks around allergens is obviously a very important thing to do, but we need to think carefully about the right mechanism for doing that.
Rebecca, did you want to add to that?
Yes, just very quickly. I think this is actually a good opportunity to reflect on the quality of the data that we do have around the actual harm and burden from allergens. We don't have the same robust data that we do on foodborne disease, for example. Going back to your point, Rhian, about whether we should be setting some thresholds. That's something I'd like to take away and reflect on with the team, because it may be that we can use our existing data better so that we understand what's happening in the real world.
Darren, did you want to finish off?
Yeah, a couple of points. There was a point I think Anthony made around sort of SPS. So that is very much another active piece of work that we're running through at the moment. I sort of oversee a project within the SPS programme, which is around what does a post-SPS agreement look like from an instance delivery model point of view. So that is being planned. Hopefully, they'll be able to be sequenced together. But it is something that we're planning and making some assumptions about what that would look like, and then how do we build that into a new model. And I think Steve's point around that pressure point and working with other partners, it's very much in the early days, but I think from a team point of view, we recognise the pressure, particularly from a local authority point of view, is if we're talking about our role being slightly different, what are the factors that we can build in to help alleviate that from, not necessarily just pass the burden from our team onto another delivery partner. So are there areas that we can look at around sort of supported guidance and sort of the ability of local authorities to take action when necessary. So it's very much within the scope of the new project, and we're very mindful so that it's not just a sort of passing of the problem to somebody else as we work through that. And then sort of broadly, Chair, just the point about root cause analysis, I'm really pleased that everybody's sort of interested. For us, it's quite an exciting area that we're pushing into. Having that additional extra resource will make a difference. We will come back with the point about sort of more sort of tangible plans about what we can deliver. But the use of that data, we've made a great effort this year about improving the quality of that data through the PRISM system. So I think what we're starting to see is reaping some of the rewards of sort of being able to extract some of that data and start to analyse it sort of more thematically. But behind that, practically what we've done is set up a working group with industry. So there's an independently chaired group which we're running, which Alec Kirikides is chairing for us. So it's trying to sort of share that sort of learning and action that's required. So it's not just sort of FSA leading it, whilst we're sort of owning some of that data and being able to bring some of that data in from industry. We're really keen, and I know industry have been very receptive about sort of sharing some of that and having a more systemic way of sharing that root cause analysis, taking the learning and that being a sort of embedding a sort of culture of sort of shared prevention in the future.
Katie, did you want to just
very briefly to emphasise one thing that Darren said in that we talked about partnerships, and for me, what we need to do in this incidents operating model project is think where we add most value as the FSA. I've used the analogy of the spider in the web. I think we can do an awful lot taking in data from lots of sources, analysing, and then triggering action, not necessarily by ourselves. And so it absolutely has to be done with industry and with other bodies. And I think as we go through that project, I just want to flag it will raise some questions around risk and where we put our effort. And we've already alighted on that, you know, how much should we be doing in providing support to local authorities dealing with smaller local incidents? Where might we be able to do more automation, things like that? So there'll be some strategic questions for the board, I think, which we can come back to as we go through that project, probably before next year's update.
Thank you. I was just going to say what this really brings home to me is that this is a period of quite considerable change for the incidents and resilience group. You know, not just the organisational change, but a real recognition that we kind of can't quite carry on with the model we had before. That's not going to enable us to add the most value, as Katie says. So I think we need to do a number of things, and this is sounding like it's a topic we should look at the retreat, so that the board really understand better what the new structures look like, what the goals are, to understand some of these sort of tensions in the system. I think it will also be timely to think about the KPIs that we look at for the incidents team when we have them at business committee, so that, you know, once we've set a sort of new direction of travel, that we make sure we're monitoring against that and we're not still sort of stuck in the old way of doing it. So I think we need to take away how we return to this, but perhaps with a view to doing something at the retreat, certainly something where the board has an opportunity to do a deeper dive into this. I do really want to understand this industry interaction better at all levels. I mean, the paper says, you know, we engage with them to ensure good practice and learning. Well, I'd really like some evidence that is happening. How are businesses responding? What do they do when we send them this? So I think there's an important piece for the board to have a look at there as well. Yeah. More to do, but on the back of an already busy team, thank you for everything that you are doing. This is about continuous improvement, and it's really great to see that happening, and that the team are really thinking in that mode. I don't think I have anything more to say. I mean, I don't know that there are any specific actions coming out of this, except perhaps that we just need to do a deeper dive into this at some point, and I think we do need to look again at the KPIs for this work. Junior, did you want to?
Yep, I was just going to reflect, Chair. So this is the last time that the incidents resilience report will come to the board under my sort of like accountabilities because of the changes that we're going to be making. And I'd just like to reflect on a couple of things. So I think the conversation that we've had today, I think it points towards the decisions that we've taken as an organisation to actually move it. Feels like the right one, because the context is changing. Things are becoming more complicated in terms of how we respond. I just want to say thanks to Darren and the team for the last 3.5, 4 years. It's been brilliant. And thank you to Darren personally, because actually every time he comes here, it's either his birthday that he's usually here presenting on. This time it's his anniversary. I just wanted to note that and reflect that back to the team as well.
So thank you to Darren, to Darren's wife, and Junior. Thank you for all the work you've done. You know, I think the incidents team has come on in leaps and bounds under your leadership. So I think you're handing it on with a lot of good work done, and you know, that doesn't take away from the recognition of there's still much more to do. Okay, thank you very much indeed, Darren, and also James. I know, you know, incidents is close working between incidents and policy, and it's good to see both of you here today. Thank you. Right. One of the other things that I realise, which is fantastic, is now that we've got a much bigger, almost full complement board, and everybody is very engaged in the work of the agency. I have left insufficient time for discussion on several papers today, and I think that's a reminder that we really need to expand the time that's available for discussion at subsequent board meetings. So I'm really sorry that we've chopped off discussion on a number of papers this morning, and may well be true of the next one to come as well. However, we are going to move on now to the annual animal welfare report, and it is the annual report, though I should note that we'd previously agreed to move a couple of the annual update papers that come to the board so that they're more evenly spread throughout the year. We had quite a clutch that all used to come in September. So we'd agreed to move the animal welfare one earlier. So what that essentially means is it's only 9 months. If you thought it wasn't long since you'd last heard from the team, you're right. It was only 9 months, not 12. Although the paper does describe a full year of activity. Just before I ask officials to introduce the paper, I think it's worth me making a few comments, given that this is clearly an area of growing public interest. And, you know, that's reflected in part with some of the questions to the board. So, as a reminder again, well, for all of us, but particularly, I suppose, for the newer board members, that animal welfare at slaughterhouses is a function which is delivered by the FSA operations team, but that is on behalf of DEFRA and the Welsh Government, who are the policy owners for this area. We deliver the work under a service level agreement, and that agreement sets out the activities, it sets out the monitoring and the reporting functions. So we deliver to that contract. I think the paper does make clear that where we see deviations from the required standards, which are laid down in law, that we do take action. And that action might be against an individual, or it may be against the business as a whole. Now, at the September board meeting, when we had the last annual update, we heard about a very significant welfare investigation into a slaughterhouse in the Midlands. Our enforcement activity there led to the removal of the business's approval to operate as a slaughterhouse. Now, sadly, we're currently dealing with another very significant welfare case relating to a plant in the northwest of England that was the subject of undercover filming in February this year. And this has generated a very large public response, quite understandably. It was very distressing. We've received over 500 letters from members of the public into the agency. And I think it's really important that the board and frankly everybody who cares about animal welfare to know that FSA officials have already taken enforcement action against individuals, and some have been referred for consideration for potential prosecution. The review of the business itself and their approval to operate is expected to conclude very shortly. But I think it's important to remember, for the full process of all of this to complete and for us to close these cases, there are several further stages which are outside the FSA's control, and that includes the consideration of any evidence by the CPS and, frankly, the time that these matters take to proceed through all the legal channels. Now, one of the consequences of that is that we're not able to provide as much detail right now as people are keen to see about this individual case. And so I think it's important today that we do focus on the principles under which we run the system rather than getting into the specifics of ongoing matters. So having sort of given you that little bit of sort of background context about what we're here to do today, I'm going to welcome the FSA officials working in this area. They're in fact joining us online. You've got the paper, but I'm going to hand over to them to just summarise the contents. Thank you.
Thank you, Susan. Can I just check you can hear and see us okay?
Yes, absolutely fine. Brilliant. Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much. I'm very pleased to present the FSA's annual report to board on animal welfare for the financial year 25-26, which covers updates on the controls delivered by the FSA in abattoirs in England and Wales, as the Chair said, on behalf of DEFRA and Welsh Government. The report covers data relating to the volume of breaches of animal welfare law in abattoirs, where the FSA is responsible for oversight and enforcement, and also the volume of breaches identified at the abattoir that have taken place either on farm or in transport. Those breaches are referred by the FSA to the Animal and Plant Health Agency, who triage them to the appropriate enforcement body. The board will note a rise of 6% in breaches in abattoirs and 7% across farm and transport, although overall the number of animals whose welfare was impacted by these breaches is slightly lower in abattoirs than the previous year, and significantly lower for transport and farm than the previous year, mainly due to a reduction in breaches affecting large numbers of poultry. The picture remains that overall compliance with welfare regulations across abattoirs is very high, and compared to the overall volume of animals processed, the number affected by welfare breaches is extremely small, equating to 32 animals in every million. However, that said, as always, we are determined to work with food businesses to continue to make improvements, to identify areas and instances of non-compliance, and to take proportionate and robust action where required in line with our enforcement protocol. The statistics for enforcement activity across the year are included in the paper, whether that enforcement action is taken against a business or against individuals if it's felt that personal negligence or intentional cruelty occurred. For those breaches occurring on farm or in transport, we continue to work very closely with colleagues in APHA, DEFRA, Welsh Government and local authorities to ensure we're providing the best possible evidence to them to allow enforcement action and subsequent improvements. Our report goes on to discuss some of the key activities across the year, including those under our Animal Welfare Action Plan. I'll pull out just a few of those. In addition to official vets monitoring animal welfare daily in abattoirs, supplementary assurance visits in the shape of specific welfare veterinary audits and unannounced welfare inspections were carried out as usual, 272 of those across the year. And as always, any areas for improvement that are identified are used to improve guidance and instructions to both industry and our frontline staff, and enforcement action is always taken where necessary. In terms of data and reporting, we made changes to our IT systems in the last part of the year, which will allow us, as requested by board, to differentiate between accidental and willful harm, and this data will be presented in the next annual report. DEFRA published its animal welfare strategy for England in December last year, and that includes a plan to consult on ending the use of high concentration CO2 as a stunning method for pigs, as well as commitments to improve on-farm and transport welfare through partnership working, including with the FSA, and targeted intervention. We're expecting further detail on a delivery timetable later this year, and will collaborate closely with DEFRA and industry on any associated delivery changes. The FSA has also undertaken the biennial slaughter sector survey on behalf of DEFRA and Welsh Government, which analyses various factors and data around animal slaughter across abattoirs in England and Wales, including levels of non-stun slaughter for halal and kosher meat. DEFRA are expecting to publish the survey results later this summer. I'd like to finish, Chair, to touch on the covert filming and subsequent investigation that you have covered in your intro. As you mentioned, this resulted in a full investigation by our field operations teams following covert footage taken in an abattoir in the northwest of England that undertakes non-stun slaughter of cattle for kosher meat production. The food business was fully cooperative throughout that investigation. It included approximately 200 hours of CCTV footage review and resulted in a number of enforcement actions being taken, including the suspension and removal of the licenses of some abattoir employees to work with live animals, a number of formal enforcement notices, and a referral for potential prosecution. As you said, the business's approval to operate is also currently under review. We have had now close to 600 inquiries and complaints from members of the public, MPs and the media, driven by the reaction to the very graphic footage of non-stun slaughter in this instance, and they've all been responded to. I think these events underpin what's clearly a growing level of public interest in animal welfare at slaughter, particularly non-stun slaughter, also backed up by the increasing volume of freedom of information requests we're receiving on this topic. There is much dis and misinformation across social media, and the FSA earlier this month published an evidence-based blog that explains the legal framework around the slaughter of animals for food, the safeguards in place, and the FSA's role in enforcing animal welfare standards. Both DEFRA and Welsh Government, as policy leads, are clear on their preference for all animals to be stunned before slaughter, whilst also respecting the rights of Jews and Muslims to eat meat prepared in accordance with their religious beliefs. We'd like to stress as part of this report to the board that the FSA is keen as a critical delivery partner to work closely with DEFRA and Welsh Government on any initiatives designed to reduce levels of non-stun slaughter. That concludes my summary, Chair. My colleague and I will be happy to field any questions.
Great, thank you very much indeed for that. And I appreciated those comments at the end. The board has talked about non-stun slaughter, I think, at every occasion we discuss the animal welfare update. And I'm pleased to hear that we're in conversations with DEFRA and Welsh Government on that. Can I suggest, I'm trying to think of the best way to handle this, but can I suggest that we start by reflecting on the questions that we received to the board in relation to this particular ongoing incident, because I'm sure there'll be points that the board members want to pick up on. I have to say, I thought the questions were very thoughtful and they had some really constructive suggestions, which was great. I'm sure board members, might want to discuss that a bit more. So why don't we have a little bit of time to talk about that? And I think that will then lead us into some of the wider questions in the paper, which are clearly relevant, like CCTV in abattoirs, for example. Okay, Sue, you're our lead in this area, so why don't you kick off?
Can I just, Chair, do a few reflections first, if you won't mind, on the paper before we talk about that? I mean, I think having had the opportunity to spend time in abattoirs over the last 6 months, and I will continue to spend time in abattoirs on behalf of the board, I think one thing we have to say is I've been hugely impressed by the high levels practiced by the OVs around maintaining animal welfare and also the safety of food. And I think we need to remember that when we look at the figures. And I think one of the things that I picked up, particularly from the report, was looking at something like pododermatitis in flocks. That was picked up through enhanced training of the OVs, that the whole process of feeding back through local authorities and APHA then allowed an improvement of that. And I think that's a really good example of how we're improving animal welfare, both at the slaughterhouse and through transport and on farm. So I think we need to say that. I think the thing that struck me and has come through, though, from the questions is, as a veterinary surgeon, I am regulated by my Royal College. I have to do 35 hours every year of compulsory continuing professional education, and that's so I am able to uphold animal health and welfare. And it seems slightly strange for me that we have slaughtermen who are also key in upholding animal health and welfare, who are not having training on a regular basis. So one of the things that I think I would like to take away from the ongoing stuff that's in the news at the moment is I would like to see us institute some sort of reaccreditation process for our slaughtermen, so we can be absolutely sure that they're up to date, they're not acquiring bad habits, and at that critical moment, the welfare of the animals at the time of kill is actually upheld in the best way that we possibly can. I've got lots of other thoughts, but I know my colleagues have got other things to say, so perhaps we'll give them chance as well.
Thank you. Tim.
Thank you. And it continues well from what Sue just said, because equally, both professionally and through the FSA, I've had quite a lot of exposure to what goes on in meat processing plants and slaughterhouses. And I think it's quite right that there is a degree of professionalism, certainly around our OVs and MHIs. But I think also there's an important point here around trying to promote education and the professionalism within the best performing of those plants. So Sue's proposal, I think, is really well made. I'd also like to reflect that the numbers, although unacceptable even at the smallest level, are nonetheless small for very, very busy industry. And I think that reflects well not just on the quality within those plants, those FBOs, but also for our own staff that have got quite a difficult job and in a very busy and frenetic sometimes environment. So if we can do more in line with Sue's proposal, I think that's something it'd be nice to see the board support for. Obviously, the practicality of that needs to be worked through and resource implications, but at least having the energy to want to do something about it and putting that in train would be, I think, a step forward. Thank you.
Thank you, and thank you for the paper. I wanted to reflect on one of the questions, or quite a few of the questions around CCTV, because obviously in the paper you did recognise that there has been an increasing number of CCTV failings. But the questions, quite rightly, prompted us to think about how modern the technology is around CCTV, how sharp the pictures are, how you can actually use that more effectively, particularly with the use of AI, and how we're going to review the technology that is used and the effectiveness of CCTV going forward. Thank you.
Yes, CCTV is mandatory, but the quality of it is not. I think the fact that the paper notes that the quality in some of the undercover footage was higher than ours is a cause for concern. We want our OVs to have the best technology at their disposal. Any other points which relate directly to the questions? I think if not, maybe, I don't know, Junior, whether you want to pick this up or the team want to, it would just be interesting to hear your reflections on the questions and any actions which you are able to tell us about which arise from this incident. And then we'll go back to the wider paper. Junior, looks like you're
okay. So I, like you, Susan, thought the questions and the way they were framed are really helpful and constructive. When you consider the volume of responses we've got to this, I thought it was really helpful, and the team and I have sat back and reflected on those responses. So I think the themes that we've picked up as a result of those questions obviously relate to CCTV, certificates of competence, approvals, and also our ability to monitor and make sure that our people are trained effectively in order to respond to what they see on a daily basis. So I'll probably just pick up the CCTV one specifically in a bit more detail, because I suspect that the team will want to pick up some of the others more broadly in their responses. We've already prepared for some of this. So in relation to the questions about monitoring of CCTV, we are actually paid or resourced by DEFRA to monitor a minimum of 15 minutes per day on that. That is a minimum. So we do actually require them to actually monitor more depending on the circumstance and the plant history and depending on what might be going on at any point in time. That is also complemented by compliance checks that the teams, whether it's the sort of like SDP, our own field veterinary leaders, who go in to complement the work that's actually happening. So we check. So a couple of things just in relation to the quality of the CCTV. So you're right, we don't mandate through our policy what the specification should be. in terms of the quality of the cameras that are put into plants. But we are now working with DEFRA specifically on that, because actually that was one of the learning bits of learning that we've taken from this specific time at the plant in the northwest. So we are looking at that with them, but we've also identified some procedural things that we can improve on in terms of operational delivery. So, you know, making sure that they're looking at a wide array of the different CCTVs in plant, because actually some of them get dirty. So some of them, it's not necessarily about the quality. It's actually they've maybe not been clean, but so we've probably fallen into some bits of practice where we monitor CCTV footage, but we're probably limited to 1 or 2 or 3 cameras that we might use. So there are things like that that we've been able to work with the SDPs on, also to update the FBOs on more broadly through sort of like our communication with them, just so that they are wary of those sorts of things as well. So on the others, I'm going to pause there, just in case you wanted to come in, Richard and Kev, specifically on any other sort of like broad themes that have been picked up.
Just on the CCTV theme, I think there's also something there about future technology as well. So I think 2 conversations with DEFRA and Welsh Government. One is about how we can improve the legislation to be more specific about the minimum specification for classic CCTV systems. So minimum resolution, I think, is one of the things that we need to look at. But then some of the questions we've had in talk about AI-enabled proactive CCTV systems. And I think we'd be very happy to look at how such technology might help us to improve the way that we deliver controls. Much of that needs to be DEFRA-led, because that would need industry consultation, potential new legislation. But we will certainly have those discussions with DEFRA and Welsh Government and see what can be done in that space. I'll touch on certificate of competence as well. I know that Sue mentioned that. It's worth mentioning that licenses to slaughter animals are provided by the FSA only once an individual has been properly trained and assessed by an independent body. These can be suspended or revoked on the recommendation of the OV as part of delivering those daily controls. And they obviously ensure that individuals undertaking slaughter activity are doing so properly and competently as part of their daily checks. That says, I think it's a really positive suggestion to look at how could we formalise some sort of ongoing competency assessment as part of the framework. So we'll certainly pick that up in conversations with DEFRA and Welsh Government as well.
Great, thank you very much for that. I'm very conscious of time, but I think that's been helpful. We will provide written responses to the specific questions we've received, and when there is any further news that we are able to share about this incident, then we will do so. But for now, I want to turn our attention to the wider issues raised in this paper and invite comments from the board on any other aspects that they want to pick up on. I wonder if Anthony and Rhian, whether there was anything that came up at WFAC or NIFAC on this that you wanted to raise. Rhian.
Thank you, Chair. Nothing particularly at WFAC. We had a discussion about the new Welsh Government's support of small abattoirs, and just a general discussion about the abattoirs in Wales being on the smaller side and wanting to support them as much as possible with all aspects of animal welfare. But no, actually something that occurs to me looking at the paper is there a section in there about consumer interest and about labelling, excuse me, labelling of method of slaughter on products. I'm not particularly familiar with that area of labelling because it mentions sort of perhaps lack of clarity or consistency. It'd be really helpful perhaps to have a short summary for myself, perhaps for the board members, about what the landscape looks like, so consumers can make the choices they want to make. It would be very informative to see whether there's anything in that space we might do. I would welcome any thoughts that you have had, because I'm sure you do think about this sort of thing all the time. Thank you.
Maybe I'll just come back to the team directly on that. I mean, I think you mentioned that DEFRA will shortly publish their annual report on slaughter. And maybe that would those conversations would follow from that. Do you want to just come back on that point?
Yes, thanks, Chair. Yes, DEFRA will hopefully publish the biennial slaughter sector survey over the summer. which would be linked to gaining the attention to method of slaughter. Labelling of the method of slaughter there's no legal requirement for that, as we know. We do know that there's high public interest in that, but any responsibility for method of production labelling would fall under the remit of DEFRA and Welsh Government. We do note that some businesses choose to display their own welfare standards on their packaging, but that is, consumers can keep an eye out for that. There are certain schemes that have certain requirements, and that would depend on the retail outlets that they're stocked from. We are in discussions all the time with other organisations that have got interest in it, such as the BBA, who looking for accounts for clearer labelling to consumers about the provenance of their food and how the animals have been treated.
Thank you. And perhaps it's also worth noting, I met relatively recently with Baroness Hayman, who leads on this in DEFRA, and we talked about non-stun slaughter. I know that DEFRA ministers, as you know, and the board are keen to see a reduction in the number of animals killed in this way, so that it is at the minimum level necessary to enable some communities to have meat prepared in the way that meets their religious requirements, but that doesn't necessarily produce more meat produced in that way than is needed. So I think what I certainly will do is keep that conversation going with DEFRA. Labelling, as we heard, is a DEFRA policy lead. So I'm not sure we can quite how much more we can specifically do on that, Rhian, but we can pick this up offline if there's any more information you think would be helpful. Steve and then Sue.
Thanks, Chair. Just following from that point, I think if DEFRA's ambition and Wales' ambition is to reduce non-stun slaughter, then consumer choice would be an important driver of that, and hence labelling is a sort of precursor to that. So I recognise it's not a policy decision for the FSA, but I think consumer choice is important. That is something to look more at. Specifically in relation to the report, I just picked up in 5.11 this year around the use of fixed penalty notices. I'd like to understand a little bit more about how that's going to work in future. Personally, I think it's a sensible, positive step, but I noticed that the report said the first analysis was that they were unlikely to be proportionate for most animal welfare offences. So clarity on that, but it did look like further in that paragraph that they were going to be used more effectively, and certainly within the wider regulatory landscape, fixed penalty notices or civil penalty notices are being used more and more frequently to help resolve issues more speedily than having to go through the formal legal court process with those associated delays. So I'd like to understand a little bit more about that in this remit. Thank you.
And Sue?
It was just a comment really around pigs. I mean, we've had a lot of stuff about the welfare of animals at time of kill for cattle, but looking at the animal welfare strategy for England, I really think the consultation on stunning of pigs with CO2 can't come soon enough. I think there's considerable evidence now. These are sentient beings and they do suffer during that period of time when they're subjected to carbon dioxide. And I know there are cost implications associated with changing, but I would welcome that report, and I would certainly welcome from a personal level a change to that whole process.
Thank you. Well, we'll wait for that consultation to come out. I'm going to come back to the team to talk on the Steve's point about enforcement, and maybe if you can just tell us a little bit more detail about your thinking on fixed penalty notices, etc. Thanks.
Yes, when fixed penalty notices were first discussed, it was back in January 23, where the FSA attended a workshop that was arranged by DEFRA, and at that time the focus was more on transport and market breaches. There was limited context for the FSA at that time, and it was stated that fixed penalty notices should only be used for serious welfare issues where there was unnecessary suffering or harm. The FSA view at the time, that was based on the information available, that we were unlikely to use FPNs, fixed penalty notices, as being proportionate to the offences that the FSA routinely investigates, and therefore they're not likely to be used. And DEFRA accepted that position at the time. although subsequently did not exclude the FSA from the legislation and the subsequent guidance that was made available. That made fixed penalty notices an option for each enforcement authority having then the discretion to use fixed penalty notices within their powers. We've since revisited the decision that was taken at the time with more information, and fixed penalty notices will be considered in the future, although we do anticipate that their use will be in exceptional cases. We're currently working through an operational flow process which will be shared with interested stakeholders shortly, and ahead of it becoming part of the FSA's enforcement policy, hopefully later this year.
Okay, I think that's covered off most of the, all of the questions that have come up right now. So thank you for this report. I really want to sort of echo Sue's initial comments, and thanks for all the work that is going on every day in trying to safeguard and uphold animal welfare legislation in slaughterhouses. It's not an easy job, and I really admire the professionalism with which you and many of your colleagues go about it. I think we have seen, in a way, we haven't talked about some of the progress that this report acknowledges, but it's good to see that. And I think it's evident, the board has clearly heard the growing public interest and concern around non-stun slaughter. As I said earlier, I am confident that DEFRA are looking to act in this area, and it's really helpful for me to have a very clear steer from the board that we are, committed to working with them in whatever way we can to reduce the numbers of animals that are subject to non-stun slaughter. So there'll be updates, I'm sure, certainly on this on the particular incident we're handling with, but also on any news from DEFRA. We will circulate the slaughter report when that comes out, so that people can see that and follow up any actions that fall to the FSA as a consequence of that. So for now, thank you again. Really appreciate the paper and all the work that's going on, and we'll let you go. Thanks. So moving on now, and sort of change of topic, but still another annual report. And this is the report from the Director for Northern Ireland, and really pleased to welcome Andy Cole, who to the table. To introduce his paper. I think this is a good opportunity for the board to look at and consider the FSA's role in Northern Ireland, which is in some aspects slightly different to what it is in England and indeed Wales, including, of course, the additional responsibilities in relation to nutrition, but also the the practical implications of the Windsor framework bear heavily on the work of the FSA in Northern Ireland, and I really saw that when I visited the Belfast BCP earlier in the year. So it will be good, I'm sure, to be able to talk about that a little bit more this morning. But why don't I just hand over to you in the first instance, Andy, to summarise your report.
Thank you, Chair. It's great to be here and to have met newer board members for the first time. If I talk too fast and you don't understand me, just heckle at me and I'll slow down. No offence taken. Just to note, since the last time I was before board, the Northern Ireland team, along with Wales, has moved into Policy Directorate, led by Rebecca. And that gives a real strong policy alignment across the nations. And alongside Shan, as Director of Wales, been working closely with Rebecca just to ensure that transition has been seamless for the team. It's a team I'm incredibly proud to lead, to say that every year, no days ever the same. The breadth of the role is huge, but extremely rewarding. And whilst the report is in my name on paper, the sheer quality and scale of the work I'm reporting on is testament to my full team. So a thank you to them for all that they do. It's beyond appreciated. The paper itself is hopefully self-explanatory. It isn't possible to cover everything in detail, so it's a snapshot only of some of the main issues and drawing in those areas which are perhaps different, for want of a better word, in Northern Ireland. If you don't already know, our wee country likes to be a wee bit special, not right, Anthony? So I'll give a bit of light and shade just on what threads through the paper for you. Let me firstly give board delivery assurance on the priorities that you've set, be those incidents to keep consumers safe, food standards delivery model rollout, meat charging, future of food regulation, and of course SPS in the context of Windsor Framework. Board direction on those programmes of work remain the focus and deliveries in line with agreed plans. Let me also give you assurance around our delivery partners. District councils continue to do a sterling job across all of their responsibilities. The data outlined in the paper is assurance of that. Since that, the April data has come in and 10 of the 11 are assessed as low risk, so that's credit to them. They do all that with the added complexity of balancing different rule books, both at port and inland. All 11 DCs are operating and now reporting to the new food standards delivery model, and they're now engaging on future food regulation. That's real reflection of their commitment to our agenda. Our SLA with DAERA continues to operate well, and our wider work with DAERA on the Northern Ireland Food Strategy Framework, which the FSA is a key delivery partner in, as well as Lough Neagh, speaks to the excellent working relationships right across all levels of the organisation. The Chair has already reflected on FSA stakeholder relationships in Northern Ireland, across sectors, industries, academia, right up to ministerial level. I'm proud to say that's something that the team do exceptionally well, and it helps us to navigate that careful path, balancing the complexities, the political environment we operate in, the North-South and the All-Ireland arrangements. Looking closer to the paper, what I've tried to do is de-emphasise those areas where Northern Ireland has additional responsibilities. In relation to the dietary health agenda, we continue to work to the priorities which you previously agreed. The paper outlines a number of key deliverables under those priorities. An important element has been the publication of the Healthy Futures Framework. That's the new Northern Ireland Executive agreed obesity prevention strategy, and that puts our dietary health work right at the heart of government in Northern Ireland. We're a key delivery partner in the framework, and we're already working to deliver with the consultation on restricting the promotion of food and drink high in fat, sugar and salt planned for July. The team's also keeping closer to the wider developments already mentioned today, including the healthy food reporting, healthy food targets and reporting. And we'll be working with Ian in his role as CSA, drawing on his expertise to build on some of those areas. Those conversations have already commenced. As always, I must reference the Windsor Framework and the breadth of responsibilities that sit uniquely in the team, which come from operating in that dual environment. EU reporting on chemical contaminants is touched upon in the paper. That represents a massive work stream in itself and part of a wider reporting requirement into the EU. And of course, all of that work happens whilst keeping the wider SPS negotiations at the forefront of our minds, and will be agile as the outworkings of those negotiations are published. But just to highlight the board that the Windsor Framework will remain, and our focus remains full and faithful implementation of those arrangements. This year we've seen the delivery of the 4 new SPS product inspection facilities. That's a major milestone, years in the making, and world-class in nature. DEFRA Committee and Susan were there recently. It's a huge cross-departmental piece of work which the FSA team was key to, with the FSA sign-off of the public health requirements across those facilities. I'll briefly touch on, just mention the Northern Ireland Assembly Democratic Scrutiny Committee, or the DSC as we call it. That's a structure and a level of scrutiny that's unique under the Windsor Framework arrangements that we continue to service. You'll note in the paper mention of the breakfast directives, and that's the first time that FSA transposed an EU directive into domestic legislation since the UK left the EU. And whilst it's condensed just into one paragraph in the paper, it's a great example of the complexity of the operating environment in Northern Ireland. We worked across ministers, departments, district councils, wider stakeholders, and the regulations had to be considered by DSC, scrutinised by the Committee of Health, and ultimately into the full Northern Ireland Executive, i.e. all ministers, our cabinet as such. And that included various written and in-person evidence sessions throughout that legislative process. So I know more about jam and marmalade than I ever thought was possible. This operating context is also emphasised with forthcoming pieces of legislation noted in the paper and the issue of meat charging. Recommendations regarding meat charging will again ultimately need to be a decision for the full Northern Ireland Executive as opposed to an individual minister. And that's why our networks are so important across government with ministers, officials and advisors. And they have us in good standing to navigate those cross-cutting pieces of work. Finally, looking ahead, the forward look sets out our continued focus on priorities around dietary health, our legislation programme and the work in relation to Lough Neagh. And we're approaching the final months of this Assembly mandate. We'll continue to flex our resources as needed and prepare for a new Assembly and Ministers next year. In closing, my ask of you today is to note progress, challenge our delivery and alignment, and comment and provide a sense check on the priorities for the coming months. Happy to take your questions.
Thank you very much, Andy. Really good to hear that. And just, on top of my thanks and your thanks to the team, the board will be interested to know when I went to the BCP with the EFRA committee, both the chair of that committee and the clerk went out of their way to thank FSA officials in Northern Ireland, who I think had pulled that visit together at very short notice. And the comment that stuck with me is when we ask the FSA a question, we always get an answer. And I mean, that should be how it is, but nonetheless, I was really heartened by that. Thank you. Okay, Anthony, this is your purview, and I know NIFAC keep a close eye on what's happening in Northern Ireland. Do you want to make any comments?
Just a couple of observations and then maybe one question for Andy. As you said, we have a different remit in Northern Ireland, and as Andy says, it's a special place, but not really coming through maybe is just the sheer volume of interaction that the FSA has within Northern Ireland. It's a small place. We all know each other. Personal, professional relationships are very important in getting stuff done there. And the position that the FSA has within Northern Ireland across government departments and stakeholders is immense. And that's due to the work of the team and Andy that leads it in terms of how those interactions are. We've got a really key and impressive role within Northern Ireland. But I just wondered, Andy, if you would like to explain a little bit about what you mentioned there in relation to the cross-cutting elements and the need for the Northern Ireland Executive as a whole to decide on them, because that is a level of complexity that doesn't exist in any other jurisdiction.
Yeah, it's quite unusual. It's a result of the conflict, and it's one of those governance checks and balances. So we have a mandatory coalition in terms of our governments. We have 4 opposing political parties that sit in that Northern Ireland Executive. The joint office is the 2 big parties, First Minister and Deputy First Minister. They're at complete ends of the political spectrum, constitutionally anyway. So when we're bringing forward meat charging, that will obviously impact on DAERA responsibilities. It'll impact on the Department of Finance in respect of management of public money, Department of Justice in respect of enforcement, and obviously DFM and the FM as well. So all political parties are touched on it. So we need to navigate that in terms of the consultation, the policy proposals and board position, and that into the full executive. And that's the same with our legislation as well. They're invariably cross-cutting as well. Once we introduce enforcement, and it goes beyond the Department of Health and our sponsor department in DAERA, we're into the full executive. So it just requires those networks to be alive and warm, to be able to engage with advisors and officials to navigate that.
Thanks. That's a useful reminder for those of us who do live and breathe it every day, as you and Anthony do. Any other comments on this paper? Steve?
Thank you. I thought it was, again, a really interesting paper. Lots of things I could pull out, but just one thing I wanted to touch on was in 4.10, that interesting research about mapping fast food outlets and grocery retailers in relation to proximity to schools. I just wanted to reflect that it's great to have that data and that research. I'm sure it probably isn't restricted to Northern Ireland. I'm sure it's equally applicable elsewhere in the UK. And just reflecting how that fits with the work that we're seemingly about to do with school food standards, and the sort of the tension there about how we're having that overall impact in terms of the availability of healthy food, and whether there are any follow-up actions in Northern Ireland that resulted from that research, or any plans that are under development that we could think about. I know, for example, there's some previous work, I think in the northeast, where local authority planning controls are used to restrict the ability for fast food outlets to open near schools. So I'm sure there are other examples like that, but it just felt opportune to mention that in the light of the new work we might be doing. Thank you.
My comment, I suppose, relates to that, and I think we talked about it a little bit earlier on today, but I do think that we should use the fact that Northern Ireland have got the remit for dietary health as a feed into the rest of the FSA, even if it's just a data feed, but particularly maybe as a test bed feed, that actually there's things that we could probably do in Northern Ireland under the FSA that might help and inform things that we might then want to do in the rest of the remit.
Thank you. And we obviously talked earlier about, when we had the strategy paper, about the work that the FSA could, should, might think about in relation to taking forward our commitment to healthier diets. So I think that perhaps that conversation is something we might roll into thinking about our future remit. And although I missed the discussion of Ian's paper, some of the recommendations he was making about thinking more about ultra-processed food, thinking about exposure data, I think is very relevant to the Northern Ireland scenario. Any other questions from the board on this paper? Rebecca, I can see you trying to come in.
Yeah, not a question. I just wanted to draw attention to the very significant expertise that we have in Northern Ireland in terms of implementing EU requirements. So the paper notes things like the breakfast directives and the very significant reporting requirements that are necessary. And I think there's a lot we can learn, and we can use that expertise as we think ahead to the SPS agreement.
Absolutely, and I think I referenced it in my chair's report of really seeing how that close working at the BCP was working between our officials, port health authorities, and the EU. Frank.
Yeah, thank you very much, Andy. I'm also conscious we met with quite a number of the Northern Ireland team, at a recent event on a coffee catch-up session, which was excellent. But just this is personal curiosity, really. I mean, you mentioned the 4 SPS sites. Chair, you visited one recently. We visited one, didn't we, last year when we were in Belfast? And I wonder what is the future of those if SPS comes to fruition, because there's a huge, potentially sunk investment in there, isn't there?
Well, that's a matter for UK government, I think. I would say. I don't know if Katie wants to say anything more about that, or just really leave it there. It's kind of out with us.
I should say that SPS only affects GB. Windsor framework still will be in place no matter what agreement is done for Northern Ireland. So just to put it in that context.
But there is a wider question about the investment in BCPs elsewhere in the country. Yeah.
Andy could probably say a bit about that.
Yeah, the Windsor framework will remain subject to the negotiations. There may be less friction in the movement of food from GB to Northern Ireland, but certainly there'll be a level of checks that will remain under the existing arrangements. But it's a bit of watch and see, Frank, and take our position in that. That was an investment, primarily capital investment by DEFRA. We resource through a ring fence pot that comes through Treasury, through Ian, and that to resource the DCs and the local authority footprint for the checks at the port. So it sits outside of our main Ardell budget as well.
Great, thank you very much, Andy. I mean, we haven't talked in detail about lots of the areas of work you're doing, but I think you should take that just really as agreement and support. Thanks for everything that you're doing to really deliver on the broad FSA priorities in Northern Ireland. I think you've heard the interest there is in the work on dietary health, and as that becomes, more important in what we're doing in England with mandatory health reporting and targets, school food standards. I think it is the case that we will be drawing on that expertise to support some of that wider work.
Just to come back on Steve's point, I know there was a discussion earlier on sustainability, and it's a good example of how with our nutrition policy we can fold into that policy sustainability. So the vending guidance, for example, doesn't just have nutrition principles, it's sustainability principles with the use water fountains, packaging, recyclable, local suppliers and local maintenance contracts, vending machines being energy efficiency. So we're building those into the policies that's contributing to sustainability plus nutrition. But certainly there's lessons to learn there across the nation, so we can share that. The food strategy framework has been a big platform for us, as has the obesity strategy, in terms of bringing together all the departments and playing their role in that agenda. So much to do.
Thank you. I mean, looking at the sort of priorities going forward, we've obviously talked quite a bit about dietary health. There's the legislative programme which will unfold as it does, and we have to keep pace with that. We haven't talked about Lough Neagh. I note that the sampling's ongoing and so on. I don't know that there is anything specific to say there, but I'm just looking at Andy or indeed Ian if there's anything more you wanted to update us on in relation to Lough Neagh over and above.
Yeah, just again to say the surveillance programme is ongoing this year. We'll shortly publish any risk management advice on the back of a refresh of the risk assessment and those results. It's a programme for government action, so that's a commitment from the Northern Ireland Executive on how they tackle Lough Neagh. So again, FSA is at the heart of that, and we have a specific action, how we make that business as usual in years going forward in terms of the levels of cyanotoxins that are permitted in fish is something that we're working on rather than just doing an annual surveillance programme year on year. And that's a discussion that's live with the EU and across FSA as well, and in the CERD, how we might do that.
Very impressive, Andy. You're right across all of this work. Thank you so much for your leadership of the team there, and thanks to all of them too. Thank you. Okay, we're a little bit behind time, but we sometimes make it up a bit, but let's see how we go. As I said, I'm really sorry I've curtailed discussion repeatedly this morning. We're going to turn now to the report from the Chair of the Business Committee, Tim.
Thank you very much. And hopefully we might make some time up here because I think what I've got to report is that you've got a written report in front of you. I think it's self-explanatory, but I would like to pick out a couple of points. And the first is that we've had a lot of discussion both within the Business Committee and indeed at board level about how the Business Committee works and how it feeds into the various aspects of governance, including the board and indeed, where appropriate, butting up to the role that ARAC has. And my impression and feeling is that we have made significant progress towards having a very effective performance oversight role. And that's really been resolved over the last few meetings, and the fact that actually this report, I think, sort of goes through and describes the various areas that we focused on. It very much felt like business in progress, and we had a good focus in and around market authorization, looking at what achievements been made there, which has actually been obviously quite dynamic with the expectations around SPS. We're very much focused in and around people and finance, and I think on finance we've discussed elsewhere, but there has been, I think, a strong financial performance, and actually what we're seeing is no complacency because we're going to keep the scrutiny in and around that to continue to get better planning and delivery against not just statutory duties, but also to reduce our own spend so we get best utilisation of our available resources. We also keep our vigilance on local authority delivery, which has been discussed again elsewhere, continues to be an area we want to provide support to local authorities on, but we do recognise the issues that confound delivery in some areas, particularly around the ability to provide adequate workforce through the local authorities. But nonetheless, that's no mitigation for standing still. We continue to keep our level of scrutiny on that. So very happy to take any questions that people may have around what the Business Committee has done. So I pass back to the Chair. Thank you.
Thank you. Any comments or questions? Just to remind people who are watching online, the papers from the Business Committee are published as part of the papers for this meeting, if you want to look in more detail at that. And the full minutes from the Business Committee will be made available in due course, as they say. We only had the meeting last week. Okay, in which case we'll move on to the report from ARAC, which is chaired by Anthony.
Thank you. The June IRAC meeting really covered a lot of annual reports, and I don't intend to dive into them. The briefings there are happy for people to look at it. What I would reflect is that of the 5 board members who sit on IRAC, only myself and Tim have been there for any length of time, and the 3 new board members, I think, have been a welcome breath of fresh air in asking pointed questions that the rest of us might take for granted. But I think as a committee, we've settled down well, we're operating well, and I think the level of oversight is very strong within that, but happy to take any questions.
Great, thank you. I mean, it's very nice to refer to our new board members who I have to say don't really feel that new anymore. I mean, for some people, this meeting will be the final one in your first year, so you'll have had a whole year. Alison's one meeting behind, but I have to say, you know, your input has been fantastic. It has revitalised the board. It's invigorated the discussions, and yeah, theme of the morning, note to self. Let's leave more time for discussion. It's, you know, time is precious when we're all together, and really want to make the most of all of your input. So thank you to all the so-called new board members, and I'm going to stop calling you new board members from this moment on. Any comments from anyone on the ARAC minutes? Okay, in which case we'll move on to our other two food advisory committees. That's the Welsh Food Advisory Committee first, I think. Rhian, over to you.
Thank you, Chair. Yes, my update is recently WFAC had a session from the team in Wales from the policy members of the team. We're spending time at every opportunity to get to know different members of the team in Wales and how those individuals interact with the wider FSA teams across the UK. So that was really helpful in policy. I've also had a briefing session with Rebecca and Natasha recently on allergens, taking up my role that you've asked, Chair, to pay more attention to food hypersensitivity, and I find it an absolutely fascinating area. And just noting, I've been really pleased to support Chair on a couple of meetings recently, one which came via my day job at Aber Innovation, which is with Becky Gittings, who's Member of Parliament for Clwyd East, who is a champion on food hypersensitivity, and another with Natasha Foundation. So really happy to continue to do that. I'm looking forward to developing our relationships with the new Senedd members, and Chair, you mentioned at the beginning of your report about our new Minister, Nerys Evans. Look forward to supporting you when you meet with her and her colleagues. We had recently, WFAC had a themed meeting on May the 18th, actually, on enhancing our understanding of the future of food regulation. So this is our ongoing work to sort of harmonise the themed meetings that the WFAC are doing, along with the Northern Ireland Food Advisory Committee, just to keep ahead of the topics which are then going to surface at the main board meetings. And I really thank FSA colleagues for spending time briefing us on the future of food regulation and fielding our questions. And I also enjoy welcoming members from across the Welsh food system, really, to those themed meetings. And we had really good attendance at that one, as you might expect. I'm thinking about sort of engagement across Wales. I'm continuing to ask WFAC members to engage with stakeholders across Wales, to try and attend events where they're able to, just to share our networking as a committee and to engage with different parts of our system in Wales as much as possible. So coming up, I've got, in fact, on Friday this week, our regular meeting with the Welsh Local Government Association and also our Directors of Public Protection Wales. It's a really valuable catch-up, which we've now put in place for a little while to try and make sure we're engaging with those groups in particular. So I look forward to that on Friday. And coming up in July, we've got two things. So first, at the Senedd, we've got what is called in Welsh y Fachnad, which is a marketplace. FSA go there periodically to meet members of the Senedd as they're coming through the Senedd building to talk about the work of the FSA across the UK and particularly in Wales. So I'll be there for that, and let's see how many new members we can meet and greet at that. And then, of course, we've got the Royal Welsh Show coming up in July. And I know, Susan, your diary is probably getting completely packed out, as it was in Balmoral, with meeting stakeholders. And yeah, very much look forward to supporting you in that and enjoying that event. Thank you.
Great, thank you, Rhian. I'm definitely looking forward to the Royal Welsh Show, and also looking forward to our next board meeting, which will be in Swansea. So we'll all be joining you in Wales for that. Any questions, comments for Rhian? Okay, in which case I'm going to hand over back to Anthony as chair of the Northern Ireland Food Advisory Committee.
Thank you. At our April meeting, we discussed the Future Food Regulation Programme, and we really had a good in-depth discussion about what it meant for Northern Ireland, the distinct differences that we have there. We've obviously engaged very closely with district councils, local authorities within Northern Ireland, and they were quite appreciative of that. But we also looked at how we engaged other relevant stakeholders and how we feed the Northern Ireland context back up, probably through myself, but also through Andy's team and the working group. So everybody was quite happy with that. Last week, we discussed the board papers here, and at one point there, you mentioned animal welfare. I didn't comment specifically because the animal welfare paper really relates to England and Wales rather than Northern Ireland. But we did discuss it, and it was strange that we happened to be in Pilgrim's Europe's Dungannon plant, which I think is the largest poultry processing facility probably in Western Europe. It is an immense size, millions of birds going through that on an annual basis. We had a good visit around and seen the operation, and I have to say we're very impressed, as Sue had said, about the work of the OVs within those plants, but also just the high level of quality that is taken and care, both in the transportation of animals and in the processing of them going through. As well as doing that and having our meeting, we also heard directly from Pilgrims their views and their concerns in and around just current issues, including SBS negotiations, etc. So I'd just like to put on record my thanks to Pilgrims for their hospitality and for the interesting discussions that we had there. And of course, the last thing to mention, which you have already mentioned, was the Balmoral show and the fact that for the 2 days that we were there, I don't think we actually got to see much of the show because we spent it in meetings the entire time, but it was a really productive 2 days. So happy to take any questions.
Great, thank you very much, Anthony. And a good moment, I think, also to mention that I know, because we discussed it the other day, that you'll be shortly advertising for new members to join NIFAC. So if there's anybody listening in today that feels that they could contribute to that committee, there'll be an opportunity coming up pretty shortly, I think.
Yes, we'll be launching it this year with hopefully interviews around Christmas, and the majority of the board members will be up either finishing their second term, which means they'll drop off at the end of their first term. So we'll have an opportunity to test the field, and I would encourage as many people as possible to apply.
Thank you. Any comments or questions from the board? Louise?
I've just got one. You both mentioned the future of food regulation, and it'd be really helpful, and I'm sure you will feedback anything into the team that are working with it within the FSA, but I think that broader reach of insight and feedback as to where they have where we move next, actually, I think will be really helpful.
Yeah, I mean, I know that officials, I think, from the Future Food Regulation team were presumably at both of the advisory committee meetings, so they will have heard that. But if there is anything of particular note, then it would be helpful to feed that into the board subgroup as well, just to make sure we're all sort of thoroughly joined up on this.
And thankfully, a number of people on that team are from Northern Ireland, so they are definitely
Very good. So that brings me to the end of all of the scheduled items. I didn't ask at the start if there were any areas of other business that people wanted to raise. There was one thing that I mentioned in my chair's report at the beginning, which was around the conversations we've been having with the Department for Education in relation to compliance with school food standards. The consultation on the standards themselves has recently closed, and so I think it's quite likely that we might hear from the Department for Education about that over the summer and in advance of our next board meeting. There wasn't really anything to bring a paper on today. I obviously briefed the board a little bit on those conversations, but I guess just to say that I'll be in close touch with the team on that over the summer, and we can obviously bring it to the next board meeting if that develops. But the timing hasn't worked perfectly for our board meetings. Okay, if there's nothing more, I've referred to a number of written questions that we had in advance of the board already, but this is now the opportunity for anybody who is attending the meeting with us today in person, if you want to ask any additional questions to the board today. Marika.
Hello, my name is Marika Graham-Woods and I represent the Cannabis Trades Association. First of all, I see a lot of friends after all the years that we've known each other, as I sit and represent the CBD sector as a novel food within this process. And whilst I understand absolutely and implicitly that at the moment we're within an SPS agreement negotiation, I expect fully that after the 22nd of July or thereabouts, we will move into another phase. And my concern really is this, that in that 1 year period that we will have prior to enactment, that we will be able to move CBD isolate and CBD full spectrum through to full ministerial approval in the UK. And that is what I really want to just quickly outline here.
Okay, so let me, I can answer that, Marika, which is quite simply to say we are continuing, as we made clear in our letters to those people who are in the Market Authorisation Service, we're continuing to make progress on CBD. We have our consultation closed a while ago. The Food Standards Scotland consultation closes this week, I think, maybe even yesterday, but certainly this week. And so we will now be moving into the next stages of that, and then, if appropriate, advice will then go up to ministers. In the end, this will be a ministerial decision.
Can I just have clarity on not just isolated CBD, but also full spectrum?
Well, we're making progress with the things moving through the system. I don't know if, Rebecca, you want to say any more, but...
Well, just to say, as always with the market authorisation, we can never commit absolutely to a specific timetable because exactly what you said, Susan, there's a process to go through and the products are all at different stages in that process. So obviously with the isolates, we have consulted, as Susan said, so you know that those are the most advanced.
Thank you all very much for your time as usual, and I look forward to seeing you all in September with more news.
All right.
Thank you very much.
I hope so too. Okay, thank you. Are there any other questions this morning? If not, I'll just say thank you to all the board members for your questions and scrutiny today, to officials for all the work that goes into preparing the papers, and of course all the work, the additional work, the majority of the work that goes on behind that day in, day out. Thank you too for those people who've come to join us to observe the meeting today, and to the many more people who are online who I haven't really referred to, but we really welcome people listening into what we're doing and appreciate your engagement. I look forward to seeing people in Swansea in September, but meanwhile hope that you will get a bit of a break over the summer, and thank you. Bye-bye.